Chapter 741. From the beginning of the new era, the entire continent only cared about one matter. It was not the exiled pope, not the closing of Holy Maiden Peak, not Wang Po's return to Scolatry Manor. That matter was more important than all of them combined. The demons were invading. In the autumn of the year before last, the demon lord had died, Nank had left, and a new monarch had been installed. The demons were in chaos. Xuelao City was covered in blood and the weather was abnormally cold. Winter had come early, the wind and snow intertwined, and the harvest was abnormally poor. Countless small demon tribes had been forced to leave Xuelao City, and the wolf cavalry that the demon palace valued the most was produced less than a third of what it had been in the past. Anyone could see that the demons were at their weakest. No one could have imagined that the demons would choose this moment to launch a large-scale invasion. The word large-scale implied madness and disregard of all costs. Perhaps the crisis of survival brought about by the wind and cold had transformed into the demons' thirst for blood. There was another very important reason. The demon crown prince, Han Qing, had guarded the mausoleum of books for more than 600 years. Finally, he had left the capital, traversed the vast snowy plains, and returned to Xuelao City. According to his agreement with Shang Xingzhou, White Emperor City had used some secret method to send him to Xuelao City, where he had contacted a few members of the Council of Elders who had always been loyal to him. Through the intelligence from the Demon Palace, he was once more convinced that the true ruler of the demon domain was not the new demon lord of the Demon Palace, but the demon commander and that mysterious military advisor Black Robe. He believed that although the demon commander and Black Robe had worked together to overthrow his father, the demon lord who had once dominated the continent, this did not mean that they truly trusted each other. On the contrary, without the shadow in the sky, the trust between the two could evaporate at any moment. They would inevitably be wary of each other, even ready to attack at any moment. As for the young demon lord of the Demon Palace, he was just a pitiful puppet, like a blade of grass swaying between two gusts of wind. At any moment, he could be caught in the crossfire and die. Han Qing wanted to use the tense relationship between the demon commander and Black Robe. For historical reasons, he could not work with Black Robe, so it was only right that he first contacted the demon commander. He knew that the demon commander would not completely trust him, but he did not care. The person he truly wanted to work with was the young demon lord. That child was isolated and helpless in the demon palace and was presumably in constant fear. If he could obtain the support of the child and the power behind him, he would assuredly be ecstatic. Moreover, they were blood brothers. In hindsight, Han Qing's thinking was not wrong. It could even be said that he was absolutely right. The demon race was not the human race. They viewed the world from a different perspective, but there was not much difference between the two in essence. The only things that determined the direction of things were interests, trust, and the innate strength of the relationship between them. Han Qing had failed because his judgment had been wrong from the start. There really might be a problem between the demon commander and Black Robe, but the young demon lord was not the lonely puppet he had imagined. In truth, it was only after his death that the entire continent learned that the main instigator of Xuelao City's rebellion was not the demon commander, nor was it Black Robe. It was that young demon lord that all the factions pitted or ignored. He was the real usurper. The demon commander and Black Robe had joined forces to push the once tyrannical demon lord into the abyss precisely because of his existence. The demon commander and Black Robe truly did not trust each other, but they both trusted the young demon lord and treated him as their closest nephew. Just how had the young demon lord managed to obtain the trust and loyalty of these two? His father had once been the most terrifying shadow on the continent. Even if Taizong and Zhou Dufu worked together, they would not be able to completely exterminate him, but he had personally killed him. Just what sort of existence was the young demon lord? To place his hopes of success on a true opponent, to use an opponent that was unimaginably terrifying, Han Qing had completely failed. On the verge of death, even he, who had guarded the mausoleum of books for 600 years and could not be moved by wind and rain, could not help but raise his head and look at the throne. It was a young and handsome demon. The corners of his lips were slightly raised, perfectly diluting the noble and domineering aura of his demon body. The young demon was the youngest son of the mighty demon lord. He was not much older than Nank. The deceased demon lord had many children. Han Qing was the strongest of them, Nank was the most famous, and the names of the others were very difficult to remember. In comparison, his name was rather well known, as he had once been the young master of the demon lord. More importantly, it was because he had once said a few words. "I very much want Su Yorong." It was not that he wanted to see her, but that he wanted her. When these words spread through the continent, they naturally incited the boundless fury of the humans and demi-humans, as well as much mockery. Because at the time, he had nothing more to boast about besides his status as the young master of the demon lord. Whether it was his talent in cultivation or the advancement of his demon body, his performance was very ordinary. He was inferior to Nank, much less Su Yorong. In the gatherings of the nobles of Shualao City and the Lanshi Art Exhibition, he had never received any praise. He was not even as good as Chen Chongxing, much less Qiushan Jun. Until now. Outside Shualao City, the flames of war were everywhere. Within the city, the heads of countless nobles had been severed and their bodies mutilated, their blood flowing to the heavens. Outside the demon palace, wolf cavalry howled through the air. The buildings of the palace were covered in scars of bitter battle. His legendary elder brother was kneeling in front of him, his body covered in blood. The demon commander and Black Robe quietly stood at his side. He was at the very front. He was at the very center. "Do you really believe that you can always have their loyalty?" Han Qing asked the young demon lord. He was naturally speaking of Black Robe and the demon commander. "Big brother, all of you have lived for too long. When you think of things, you can only think of loyalty, hot-bloodedness, trust, schemes, these boring old words. I am still very young, so I like some more refreshing new words like ideals, dreams, sunshine, warmth, spring, the South, and girls." A moving smile appeared on the young demon lord's face. "Their support has nothing to do with loyalty, but because we share a common ideal, a dream." Han Qing understood what he meant, and his face paled. The 7th Demon General and the 24th Demon General stepped forward and dragged him out of the palace. The abyss behind the demon palace was waiting for him. The demon army was about to set out. The young demon lord walked out of the hall. As he gazed at the dense mass of wolf cavalry and the roaring demon soldiers, he suddenly fell silent. He seemed to be thinking of something, and his mind wandered. After a long time, he came to his senses and gave a self-deprecating chuckle. Then, he said something that would become famous in the future. "The sunshine in the South is better, warmer, and the spring is longer. The South also has many girls, so let's go south." Chapter 742. Tianliang County was the most famous county on the continent. 1,000 years ago, this county had the Liang estate, the Chun clan, the Zhu clan, and the long-since declined Wang clan. 2 imperial dynasties of the continent had begun here, and countless legendary figures had emerged without end, like those emperors, like Qin Xuanba, like Zhu Luo, like the current Wang Pu. With the establishment of the Great Zhou dynasty, Tianliang County had an even more special status. It was viewed as the ancestral land, and whether in terms of taxation or civil administration, it enjoyed the best treatment. The Taoist church in Xuanyang City also had the highest status of all the Taoist churches in the Orthodoxy. Its territory also expanded year by year, gradually becoming the largest county on the continent. On the map, the current Tianliang County was like a dagger. Hangzhou City was the hilt, Xuanyang City was the edge, and above it was a vast expanse of land like the body of the sword. This sword pierced straight to the north, where the lush snowy plains lay, the territory of the demons. Of course, the northernmost 1,000-some li of Tianliang County, other than the 10-some strongholds and the 2 army headquarters, was desolate and desolate. The humans had never been able to establish an effective control over this place, much less make it flourish, because this place was too close to the demons. No matter what the situation in the world was, in the north of Tianliang County, the war between the humans and the demons had never truly stopped for a single day. Early last spring, after the demon army had invaded south, the situation here had become even more tense and bloody. The normally desolate and uninhabited plains were now covered in dust and dust. Incalculable numbers of cavalry were charging at each other. Even in the capital, it was extremely rare to see flying carriages and the vicious and strange beasts controlled by the demons. They faced each other in the cold sky, like the callous and emotionless eyes of a god. Amidst the heaven-shaking battle cries, the cavalry of both sides collided like a flood, countless blossoms of blood and countless waves of chi. In a very short period of time, countless human cavalry had fallen and died. At the same time, many of the most terrifying wolf cavalry of the demon race had been trapped by the human array and then torn into disgusting chunks of flesh. Just like their standpoints, the blood of the human clan and the demon clan was completely different in color, which contrasted sharply against the white snowfield. However, as more and more lives died, the red and green blood couldn't help fusing together, and the corpses were also piled up. No matter how magnificent or ugly they were, they could never be separated. Since the dead could not be separated, those who were still alive were naturally squeezed together. The armies of the two sides could no longer be distinguished from each other, turning into a black tide that completely enveloped the vast snowy plains. In such a high-density and intense battlefield, the arrays of both the human race and the demon race were forcefully torn apart by the bloody chi. Occasionally, the pained cries of array masters who suffered from the backlash before their deaths could be heard. Occasionally, cultivators or experts of the demon race would soar into the sky, killing their way through the battlefield like a black tide, intending to flee. In the next moment, they would be annihilated by the black tide, never to be seen again. One could see the occasional flash of light within the black tide. This was the bursting of star radiance. Each ray of light signified the death of a star condensation cultivator, the bursting of star radiance. Even if Xue Xingchuan came back to life, Xiao Zhang personally came, or those mountainous demon generals in the depths of the snowy plains acted, they would not have much meaning on this battlefield. This was war, bitter but extremely fair. The final outcome depended on every single person participating in the battle. Of course, only when every single person was together would they have any meaning to this battle. Once they were separated, their meaning would decrease until it became meaningless. For example, the squad of the Mount Song army that was traversing the disorderly mountains on the eastern side of the snowy plains was on the verge of complete annihilation, but it would not have any effect on this battle. The problem was that everyone in the squad wanted to live. Their lives and deaths were very meaningful to them, so they still wanted to continue fighting, even if they were clearly no match for the enemy. This squad of the Mount Song army had left the battlefield not because they were deserters out of fear, but because they had received orders to evacuate ahead of time with a heavily injured array master. Array masters were the most important characters on the battlefield. Laying down an array required one sea of consciousness, star radiance, and the array to form an inseparable brand. This placed a very high demand on cultivators, so even the most ordinary array master had to be at ethereal opening. And when the array was broken, the array master would suffer an extremely bitter backlash. So array masters were also the characters that were the most likely to die on the battlefield. Most importantly, they were also the most likely to die. It was only natural that array masters were the people that all soldiers respected the most, and also the ones that they protected the most. In order to allow the heavily injured array master to be treated as quickly as possible, the squad of the Mount Song army had paid an extremely heavy price. By the time they arrived in these disorderly mountains, only 14 of their 30 soldiers remained. The 5 wolf cavalry pursuing them. Rubble flew into the air, the ground quaked, and the dust stirred. The figures of the wolf cavalry once more appeared before their eyes. The wolf cavalry was the most terrifying type of soldier of the demon race. Their mounts were a kind of bloodthirsty wolf found in the snowy plains. Its fur was like steel needles, its bodies massive, it was incredibly fast, and it had a savage nature. Accompanied by a shower of rubble, 5 wolf cavalry burst out of the dust, surrounding the 14 human soldiers. These bloodthirsty wolves were around a zhang tall, and the demon soldiers riding them had horns on their heads. Their bodies were covered in scales, their eyes suffused with a gloomy green, and their mouths, which were shaped like a chevron, dripped with stinking saliva. Compared to the demon nobles of Xuelao City, these demon soldiers were particularly ugly, and even more frightening. This was the true appearance of the low-level demons, and it was also the appearance of the demons in the eyes of the humans. Even the lowest level of demon soldiers could withstand a human who had undergone purification, not to mention these were the most elite wolf cavalry. Surrounded by 5 wolf cavalry, there was no way out. The faces of the human soldiers were brimming with despair, but none of them surrendered. Instead, they tightened their grips on their weapons. In a war between humans and demons, there were very few captives and very few surrenders. The reason was very simple. The demons did not have a habit of accepting surrenders. From a certain perspective, the innately brutal nature of the demons was beneficial to the human race, because they only had to worry about deserters, not traitors. It was precisely for this reason that many people had found it impossible to believe that the Mountly Sword Sect's Liang Xiaoxiao would collude with the demons. The battle began, and the victor was quickly decided. Although the Mount Song army unit could be said to have perfectly displayed the results of their arduous training, their coordination between offense and defense excellent, they were still unable to stop their foes. The furious waves of qi were suffused with the stench of blood, and countless wolf claw marks could be seen on the hard rock. The first clash only lasted for a few seconds before 3 more human soldiers were killed. The price the demon soldiers paid was the horn of one of their soldiers being cut off. The cold wind stirred up the dry snow, once more covering the wolf claw marks. The demon soldier whose horn had been cut off was furious. With a furious roar, he used his spear to raise the corpse of a human soldier in front of him. With a rip, the human soldier's corpse was torn in 2. Blood rained down. The demon soldier grabbed the upper half of the corpse, brought it to his mouth, and began to slowly chew on it. The lower half of the soldier's corpse also did not fall to the ground. It was bitten by the bloodthirsty wolf beneath the demon soldier. Kaka-kaka! In the deathly stillness of the valley, only the sound of bone being crushed could be heard. Blood dripped from the demon soldier's mouth, and also from the bloodthirsty wolf's mouth, falling to the ground. Chapter 743. The war between the humans and demons had begun over this continent, but the reason the 2 sides had fought to the death was closely related to one thing. The demons ate humans. This was the greatest fear and fury of the human race, and also the source of their greatest courage. In truth, no matter the era, the human race had never been the primary source of food for the demon race. At the very beginning, the demon race ate humans as a vestige of the desolate era, for the sake of mysterious battles, strengthening oneself, flaunting one's strength, and intimidating one's enemies. But as time passed, this sort of behavior became a habit of the demon race. Later on, this sort of terrifying behavior no longer had the same motivating effect on the demon race as it had at the very beginning, and its intimidating effect on the humans had mostly transformed into hatred and courage. From any angle, this sort of behavior had no benefit to the war between the humans and the demon race, only negative effects. The knowledgeable members of the demon race had realized this very early on. But if one wanted to break this established tradition, one would assuredly encounter many obstacles. Moreover, to the demon race, famed for their cruelty, any bloody and terrifying matter was their most welcomed mental enjoyment. Many years ago, that grand scholar Tungus, whose name had been passed down through the ages, used 20 years of research to finally determine the pros and cons of this behavior in terms of theology, the origin of customs, physiology, and psychology. In his work, the grand scholar had clearly stated that eating humans was of no benefit to the demon's advancement. On the contrary, a certain substance in the human body would infect the gray matter of the demon's brains, ultimately causing the demons who ate too many humans to go crazy and mutilate themselves to death. At the same time, Grand Scholar Tungus had expressed callous disdain for this sort of behavior in terms of theology, concluding that this sort of behavior was blasphemy against the moon god. In Shuelao City, Grand Scholar Tungus's research naturally did not receive a single voice of opposition, just like any of his research in the past. And the only other Grand Scholar of that era who had the right to question him, the Pope of the South, had also ultimately maintained his silence. Perhaps it was precisely because this silence was too different from the intense disputes between the two of them in the past that many private discussions began to circulate. Some demon scholars suspected that there was something wrong with Grand Scholar Tungus's theory, while the scholars of the Li Palace secretly proposed an outrageous possibility. That book on the topic of the demon race eating humans was highly likely written by Grand Scholar Tungus and the Pope together. At the very least, the Pope had provided a great deal of assistance. If these suspicions were true, then there was naturally something wrong with this matter, and it was very likely that it was all fabricated. But just as was said before, this was Grand Scholar Tungus's judgment. The imperial clan and nobles of Shuelao City maintained their silence, and the Pope in the Li Palace also maintained his silence, so who would dare to question them? Following the dissemination of this book, the practice of cannibalism in the demon race gradually weakened until 1,000 years ago, when the demon king, who had dominated the continent, finally took advantage of the situation and issued a ban. From that point on, cannibalism was completely forbidden in the land of demons, especially in Shuelao City. It basically never appeared again. But the power of tradition was far too frightening, the snowy plains of the demon realm far too vast, and the difference in intelligence and level of civilization between the various levels of the demon race was far too great. Even mighty existences like Grand Scholar Tungus and the Demon Lord could not make this behavior completely disappear. The inferior demons in the small tribes were still secretly eating human flesh, and they were even proud of it. How many human corpses had disappeared on the battlefield for hundreds of years? Among the dozens of demon generals, how many had not tasted human flesh? Now, with the death of the Demon Lord and the increasing bitterness of the war between the demon race and the human race, the restraining power of this ban was severely weakened. In this remote area of the snowy plains, cruel scenes like this could be seen everywhere, such as this disorderly mountain. The demon soldier and the bloodthirsty wolf were constantly tearing at the corpses of the human soldiers. Blood dripped from the corners of their mouths and fell on the hard and cold ground. At this sight, someone finally could endure no longer. With a sorrowful howl, he threw away the weapon in his hand and ran to the back of the mountain path. But before he could get very far, a wolf cavalryman guarding the southwest side caught up to him. With a short scream, he was reduced to a pile of mangled flesh on the ground. On the battlefield, the human race received this sort of bloody lesson every day. Only by fighting with their comrades did they have any hope of survival. Any form of betrayal or flight would only lead to death. Fear and anger had always been twins. When that soldier ran away in panic, the other 10 soldiers became incomparably angry. Fury was the greatest source of courage. The soldiers once more tightly gripped their weapons and roared at the 5 wolf cavalry. The captain of this squad from the Mount Song army was a veteran who had undergone purification many years ago. He was very experienced in battle, so he was much calmer than his subordinate. As the screams and furious roars rose up one after another, he was still observing the surrounding terrain, judging the current situation, and thinking of a way to escape. His gaze fell on the stretcher and he silently apologized. His squad was certain to be completely wiped out, so he would have to use his final two methods. But even if he succeeded, not a single person would be left alive. When the time came, the array master on the stretcher would freeze to death, or even starve to death. It would be a very wretched fate. Array masters were the most respected and welcomed people on the battlefield. Dying in battle was fine, but they should not meet such a miserable end. Moreover, this array master was very young. The minimum requirement to become an array master was ethereal opening, so generally speaking, they were rather old. The array master lying on the stretcher was very dark and thin, his face covered in blood and grime, but one could still tell that he was young from his appearance. Such a young array master was extremely rare even in the headquarters of the Mount Song army, let alone an ordinary army like theirs. Such a young array master was assuredly extremely talented. As long as he could survive, he would assuredly have an infinitely beautiful future ahead of him. The captain understood that it was precisely because of this that his superior had ordered them to escort this array master away in the midst of such an intense battle. Regretfully, the wolf cavalry that had been fighting with them at the time had probably also realized this, so they had not hesitated to sacrifice their fighting strength to send several wolf cavalry in pursuit. Seeing the approaching wolf cavalry, seeing his subordinates filled with the resolve to die, the captain threw away the sword in his hand and took a magical artifact from his waist. This magical artifact exuded a faint chi, resonating with some object in his body through his armor and clothes. The soldiers also seemed to sense something and turned to look at him. He opened his mouth, wanting to say something. The soldiers guessed at what he was preparing to do, and their faces paled. A young soldier's eyes reddened, not from anger, but from sorrow. There was no time to persuade, no time to comfort. The demon wolf cavalry had already charged over, their stench assailing his nostrils. Furious roars rose from the disorderly mountains. The human soldiers launched a counterattack against the wolf cavalry. No matter how sharp the teeth of the mutated wolves were, no matter how powerful the spears of the demon soldiers were, they charged. During this process, not a single person turned to glance at him. Blood spurted and limbs flew. In an extremely short amount of time, the human soldiers were all dead, while only 2 of the demon wolf cavalry had suffered light injuries. The corpses of the soldiers fell under the claws of the wolf cavalry, hung under the spears of the demon soldiers, and bitten in their mouths. The scene was abnormally bloody and terrifying. Looking at the last human, the devil soldier let out an unpleasant laugh. He could not understand what they were saying, so he crushed the magical artifact in his hand. Chapter 744. As the magical artifact shattered, a stream of chi emerged from the captain's hand and rapidly spread across the cliff. The corpses of the human soldiers that had already died were either on the ground, on the spears of the demon soldiers, or in the mouths of the strange wolves. As this stream of chi arrived, a similar but relatively weak chi began to emerge from within the corpses. This chi was like an invisible flame that had ignited a long-hidden fire seed. The demon soldiers vaguely sensed something, a hint of fear appearing in their dark green eyes. With sharp screams, they waved their spears and threw the corpses of the human soldiers into the distance. At the same time, they pulled on the leather rope around the strange wolves' necks, preparing to turn and flee. But it was too late. The bloodthirsty mutant wolf's intelligence was very low. It didn't know what had happened at all. It was somewhat reluctant to throw away the human corpse in its mouth. At this moment, a bright yellow ball of light seeped out of the human corpse. At the same time, even more bright yellow balls of light lit up the cliffs. Boom 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 boom. Terrifying explosions resounded through the disorderly mountains, like thunder descending. Then, flames appeared. In an extremely short period of time, this place was transformed into a sea of fire. The hard stones were blown to smithereens and then melted into lava by the blazing flames, falling onto the bodies of the demon soldiers. The strange wolves suffered an even more wretched fate. Half of their heads had been blown to pieces, their flesh and blood so mangled that it was impossible to make out their original appearance. Wretched howls constantly resounded through the disorderly mountains, but they were unable to pass through the terrifying sea of fire and surging waves of chi, and quickly vanished. Just like that, the demon soldiers and the strange wolves were killed. Those surging waves of chi pushed the cliff into a flat slope and then mixed into the world. Only that terrifying sea of fire lasted for a very long time before it slowly began to die down. The captain loosened the small scorched shield on his forearm and struggled to crawl backwards. His right arm had already been completely shattered by the explosive power of the magical artifact, and his abdomen was so mangled that his bones were faintly visible. He had suffered extremely heavy injuries, but he was still not dead. Before he died, there was one thing he had to accomplish, and that was to kill that array master. He respected this young array master very much. If the other could survive, he would definitely have an extremely bright future. Such an outstanding human should not be frozen to death or starved to death. Moreover, on the battlefield the day before yesterday, he had received a military order. He absolutely could not let this young array master fall into the hands of the demons. If necessary, he could kill this person. He crawled over to the stretcher with some difficulty and took 2 tired breaths. Looking at the young array master on the stretcher, his emotions were somewhat complicated and somewhat sentimental. The magic tool he used to kill the 5 demon soldiers was obviously not an ordinary magic tool, but an extremely strange magic tool, more like a formation. This kind of magic tool with the power of a formation was very rare, and the method of using it was exceedingly cruel. The Great Zhou army had basically never used it. This set of magical artifacts supposedly came from the Wunshuitangs. He was able to possess this magical artifact because he was a trusted subordinate of the general, and also because he led this squad of the Mount Song Army headquarters on very important missions, like protecting or killing this young array master. Even when the soldiers under his command died, they had no idea that their bodies had been implanted with this sort of magical artifact. When he thought of the general's order before he went to the battlefield, his expression became somewhat perplexed. For the sake of this person, the important figures of the Mount Song Army headquarters had clearly made many arrangements in advance, even prepared to have the entire squad be buried. "Just who are you?" he muttered to himself as he gazed at the unconscious array master on the stretcher. Before killing this person, he very much wanted to know his name and background. Perhaps this would give him some comfort. Regretfully, this person had suffered a backlash on the battlefield and was severely injured. It was impossible for him to wake up and answer his questions. With some difficulty, he pulled out a dagger and aimed it at the young array master's throat. He closed his eyes, took in a deep breath, and then pressed down. But in the next moment, he did not hear the sound of the throat breaking, did not feel the dagger sink into flesh. He opened his eyes and was shocked to see that the dagger was caught between 2 fingers, unable to move down. What truly shocked him was that these 2 fingers belonged to the young array master. At some point, the young array master had woken up. His eyes were wide open as he calmly gazed at the captain. His eyes were very cold and devoid of emotion, just like the ice and snow left behind in the disorderly mountains. However, beneath the ice and snow, there were faint traces of blood that exuded a faint stench. The captain came to his senses and looked into the young array master's eyes, feeling an inexplicable fear. The young array master's fingers moved and took the dagger, but he did nothing else. The captain hurriedly explained what had just happened. The young array master seemed pensive. The captain had no more strength left. Exhausted, he sat on the ground and rejoiced, "You're still alive, so the deaths of us brothers aren't unjust." The young array master's voice was particularly cold. "Do you really think that trash like you can decide whether I live or die? I just don't want to act." "What?" The captain froze, not daring to believe what he had heard. What did this mean? After a few moments of shock and bewilderment, he grew angry. He pointed at the scorched corpse on the cliff, wanting to reprimand the other party. The young array master did not give him the chance. A terrifying chi emerged from those cold and cruel eyes, jolting him to death and turning him into a blood-soaked corpse. Then, his corpse began to be burned by the flames of the magical artifacts left on the cliff, giving off an unpleasant smell. "Whether it was out of kindness or to complete a military order, you tried to kill me just now." The young array master looked at the burning corpse and indifferently said, "So you had to die." The cold wind howled, gradually extinguishing the remaining flames on the cliff and dispersing the complex and unpleasant smell. The demon soldiers and bloodthirsty wolves had suffered the most concentrated attacks from tensome magical artifacts and had been burned by the array fire. Right now, only their rough outlines could be seen, and it was impossible to make out their appearances. The tensome human soldiers were not much better off. In short, the scene was very dismal, the environment very cruel. But the young array master did not leave. He once more lay down on the stretcher. He closed his eyes. It was like he could not see the hellish cliff, could not smell the burning, could not feel the biting cold of the wind, and just fell into a deep sleep. This chapter is 1900, to pay back a portion of the debt from last time. Chapter 745. On the fourth day after the conclusion of the battle, the air in the Mount Song Army headquarters was still bitterly cold, but the stench of blood was much fainter. The streets were no longer filled with the tense sight of several hundred soldiers carrying stretchers, shouting as they ran, nor was the sacred sight of tensome sacred lights simultaneously illuminating the night sky from the sacred hospital. Many plumes of white smoke rose from the whiling outside Mount Song, drifting high into the sky. The people in the city who saw this sight from afar stopped and mourned, because each plume of white smoke represented a fallen soldier. According to a preliminary count, the number of soldiers of the Great Zhou who had sacrificed themselves in this battle exceeded 10,000, and this did not even include the laborers in charge of logistics and the cultivators who had come to reinforce the army. The mood in the sacred hospital was no longer as tense as it had been a few days ago. The majority of the injured had been brought under control, and those who were too heavily injured to be treated had long since been carried out. However, for some reason, the room in the deepest part of the hospital was still packed with people, and the mood was exceptionally anxious. "I don't want to hear any explanation. I only want you to save him." The general's face was extremely grim and his tone unyielding. When his gaze fell on the bed, his voice became even more ruthless. The injured person lying on the bed was very young. From his clothes and the cloth bag at his waist, one could tell that he was an array master. He was thin and his limbs were a little black, but his face was as white as paper. It was clear that he had lost too much blood, and his lips were curled up in dried skin. His breathing was extremely weak, and he seemed like he could die at any moment. The general's words caused the people in the room to feel an enormous pressure, and at the same time, they were rather confused. Such a young array master had assuredly come from a famous sect and had an extremely promising future, but the general was a trusted aide of divine General Ku and had an extremely high reputation and status in the Mount Song Army headquarters. Why would he be so angry over a wounded person? It had to be known that besides the military doctor, there were also two people from the orthodoxy who had treated this young array master. The general knew what they were thinking, but he gave no explanation. He had a vague idea of this young array master's background, but this was not the reason he was so angry and nervous. Before arriving at the hospital, he had just received the dossier of the investigation. Other than the young array master on the bed who was about to die, no one knew what had happened between the cliffs. But the soldiers who had seen that cliff with their own eyes were all very sure that it had been an extremely heroic affair, because the scene they had seen was extremely bitter. Some soldiers had used the magical artifacts of the Wenshui Tang clan to self-destruct, taking 5 wolf cavalry down with them. And on the path of retreat in front of the cliff, they had discovered the corpses of some soldiers. 30 of the bravest and most elite soldiers of the Mount Song army had sacrificed themselves precisely so that this young array master could survive. Therefore, he had to keep this young array master alive. Otherwise, how could he comfort the souls of his dead subordinates? I won't explain anything, because I really don't have the ability to keep him alive. A woman dressed in white rose from the bed. Her beautiful face was filled with exhaustion, and the gentle holy light gradually dissipated from her slender fingers. The general fell silent. The woman came from the capital's 13 divisions of radiant green. Her surname was Anhua. 2 days ago, she had arrived at the Mount Song Army headquarters, and then began to work tirelessly to treat the wounded on the battlefield. If not for the fact that the Mount Song Army headquarters had stockpiled enough crystals to help one meditate and recover, she might have already died from the exhaustion of her sacred light. Facing her, no matter how terrible and anxious the general's mood was, he could not say any harsh words. And he could clearly see that she had done all she could to save the young array master on the bed. The general turned to the cleric in charge of the sacred hospital. The cleric imperceptibly shook his head. If the doctors of the various hospitals were powerless to treat the young array master's injuries, could the sacred light technique of the cleric of the Li Palace and the teachers of the 13 divisions of radiant green not save him? The general's mood sank to the bottom. Unable to control his emotions, he slammed his fist against the table. The mood in the room was abnormally gloomy. Some people took off their hats, preparing to offer their condolences. At this moment, a doctor in the corner sadly said, "If only there were more cinnabar pills." The name cinnabar pill seemed to possess some sort of magical power. The room was quiet, almost deathly still, with only the sound of ragged and hurried breathing. Delight appeared in some people's eyes, but they quickly dimmed as they thought of something. Just as expected, the cleric sighed. On the first day of the campaign, our quota was used up. The general was well aware of how many heavily wounded soldiers had been sent back from the battlefield on the first day. From the very start, he had not held any hope, but when that name was once more mentioned, he couldn't help but cling to one last hope and ask, when will the next batch be distributed? Will he be able to last until that day? The cleric shook his head. The date for the medicine is 10 days from now. With his injuries, he can last for 5 more days at most. Anhua had been studying the sacred light technique in the 13 divisions of radiant green this entire time, and after the war with the demons began, she had placed all her attention on cultivation. She wanted to go to the front lines as quickly as possible to treat the wounded, so she paid no attention to the outside world. Coupled with the fact that she had only been at the Mount Song Army headquarters for 2 days, she had no idea what everyone was talking about. "What is the cinnabar pill? A pill?" she asked the cleric in confusion. Based on its name, the primary ingredient for this pill was cinnabar, which truly could be used as medicine to staunch bleeding. However, this young array master's injuries were so severe that not even her sacred light technique was effective. In her view, only several cardinals working together could save him. Could this pill have the same effect? The cleric understood what she was thinking and said, "The cinnabar pill can cure this person's injuries." Everyone nodded, none of them expressing any doubt. This was because in the hearts of those who had seen the cinnabar pill, this pill could cure all wounds and illnesses in the world. Anhua had never heard of this pill before, so she could not understand their fervent faith in it, which made her even more confused. "If it really works, why don't we hurry and try it?" The cleric sighed. "Where can we find such a treasure?" The crowd recalled the rumor that this pill could only be found in the heavens and fell silent. The general said to Anhua, "This pill is very rare." Anhua was still confused. If this pill really does have a miraculous effect, Why not have the Yao clan offer up the recipe and then have the imperial court or the Li palace mass produce it? The room fell silent once more. Everyone's gazes fell on her, and they all seemed rather nervous. No one answered her question. The entire sacred hospital suddenly fell silent. There was not a single sound. It was like her question was some sort of taboo. Chapter 746. The sacred hospital was quiet. In the innermost room, one could even hear the breathing of the people inside, and it was even possible to hear that some people were deliberately suppressing their breathing. Some people lowered their heads while others nervously looked around. The atmosphere was oppressive and tense, as if someone was spying on them. In this tense atmosphere, someone suddenly couldn't help but cough. The general glanced at him and continued to ask, 10 more days? These words caused the mood in the room to lighten a little. And Hua followed the cleric to the window and whispered, "Just what is going on here?" The cleric replied, "No one can make the Yao clan hand over the recipe, because even now, no one knows just who made this pill." And Hua was shocked by this answer. Forgetting the strange mood in the room, she raised her voice and asked, "How could this be possible? Since this pill existed in the world and had already been used, someone had naturally sent it to the various army headquarters. How could it be impossible to find out just who made it?" The cleric raised his right hand, indicating that she should pay attention to her emotions, but he did not give any explanation. "Even if we don't know the origins of this pill, what about imitating it? Even without the recipe, we can deduce it from the composition of the pill." And Hua saw the cleric's somewhat hesitant expression and thought that she had guessed at what he was worried about. She advised, "This is saving the dying and healing the injured, not doing business. The lives of the soldiers on the front lines are countless times more important than those stale notions of morality. I believe that both the archbishops and your holiness should be well aware of this point." The cleric shook his head. "You don't understand. This matter is very complicated, and this pill is also very complicated. It's very difficult to imitate. From the name, one can roughly guess that this pill probably uses cinnabar as the primary ingredient, supplemented by other medicines. If it really is so miraculous, the important part is definitely in the supplementary ingredient." And Hua stared into the cleric's eyes and said, "But please do not tell me just how rare and precious those supplementary ingredients are, because that will not convince me." There were no ingredients in the world that the orthodoxy and the imperial court could not find, but this was not enough to make the cleric speechless. He bitterly smiled and said, "Let alone finding those supplementary ingredients, even up until now, no one has been able to figure out just how many supplementary ingredients this pill has." And Hua was once more stunned, thinking, given the abilities of so many priests and scholars of the orthodoxy and imperial court, how could they not have figured out the composition and proportions of these supplementary medicines? The cleric lowered his voice and said, "The number of pills available for research is too small, and the person who provided the pills has already stated in advance that this is forbidden." And Hua became even more interested when she heard that there was such a thing. She asked, "Just what is the origin of this pill?" "Like I said before, no one knows where it came from. People only know that a bottle of medicinal pills appeared in Blue Pass a year ago." The priest's eyes suddenly became bright, as if they were glowing. However, it wasn't greed or possessiveness, but yearning and reverence. There were 20 pills in the bottle that appeared in Blue Pass. Perhaps it was an emergency, or perhaps the mysterious alchemist had made some arrangements in advance. In short, a soldier who was on the verge of death took a pill and survived. This sort of thing continued to happen. No matter how heavily injured they were, as long as they did not die on the spot, they would be able to survive after taking this pill. Although it was not always possible to completely recover from the injuries of the wounded, with some cultivators having their ethereal palaces damaged or severed meridians unable to be healed, they at least managed to escape the shadow of death. Everyone who had personally witnessed this scene of the pill saving a person exclaiming in shock that this was a miracle. This miracle naturally spread extremely quickly. In a very short amount of time, this mysterious pill became the most famous item in the Tensum Army headquarters of the Snowy Plains. At some point, people suddenly learned that this pill was called the cinnabar pill, but they still didn't know where it had come from or who had made it. Cure the dead, grow the bones of the dead. These were two phrases that Anhua had seen in the Taoist canon. She naturally knew that this was an exaggerated description that could not possibly be real. But the reactions of the people in the sacred hospital, and the bright eyes of the cleric told her that this was a real existence, and that it had already been seen by someone. How could such a thing happen? Even if the Li Palace really did hide some legendary holy medicine, it would probably be nothing more than this. Moreover, the number of holy medicines was assuredly very small, so they were completely meaningless to this war. She suddenly asked, "How many cinnabar pills are there in total?" The cleric replied, "No one knows." Upon hearing this answer again, Anhua suddenly felt very tired. But this time, it had nothing to do with mysticism, only a simple mathematical problem. Every month, a bottle of cinnabar pills will appear, so no one knows just how many pills that person has in their hands. The cleric looked into her eyes and said, "I am more inclined to believe that the cinnabar pill was refined by that person and is currently being refined." Anhua was stunned once more, her voice slightly tense as she said, "I also hope that it's the latter." If it was the latter, then it meant that the cinnabar pill could be continuously supplied to the soldiers on the front lines, and it was even possible that it would gradually increase. From every angle, this was the most ideal situation. Of course, this was based on the premise that the cinnabar pill really was that mystical. Anhua looked at the cleric, her eyes shining with hope, almost pleading. The cleric knew what she was feeling and what she wanted to hear, because he had also experienced a similar moment. Even now, he could not forget that nervousness and hope. He looked at her and calmly and firmly said, "Yes, the cinnabar pill really can save your life, no matter how heavily injured you are." Anhua's hands were somewhat trembling, not because of nervousness, but because of joy and confusion. She was a member of the clergy and also a doctor. She was deeply compassionate and benevolent, and what she most often considered was how to save the dying and heal the wounded. She was well aware that this signified that for the first time in human history, a sacred medicine could be mass-produced. To her, this signified that many life and death separations would disappear, that all pain would vanish. Of course, to the human race, this sacred medicine also signified many other things. For instance, some important array masters and cultivators would have 2 lives. So what did this pill signify for the war between the humans and demons? Anhua did not think about these things. She was thinking, if this pill is not a gift from the divine kingdom to the human race, then what is it? No matter who that person is, they are destined to stand on the divine altar of history and receive the worship of all the people, right? This chapter had 1981 words, continuing from the chapter that had been updated at the starting point. Chapter 747. The conversation between Anhua and the cleric by the window had not been loud, but the room was too quiet, so everyone could clearly hear it, and then they began to worry. If that person revealed their identity, they would assuredly obtain unimaginable benefits through this pill. This would not only mean wealth, but even more importantly, power. But it was obvious that this person had never had any such thoughts. Why? Was it to preserve their sense of mystery, or was it for safety? Anhua still did not understand why neither the imperial court nor the orthodoxy had been able to find out who that person was. Could it be that this medicine called the cinnabar pill was a drop of jade nectar from the divine kingdom? It had to be known that since the pills would be delivered to the various army headquarters at regular intervals, they would assuredly leave behind many clues, such as who was responsible for delivering the pills. The Wenshui Tangs. The cleric knew what she was thinking and explained. The people responsible for delivering and distributing the pills are all people from the Tang clan. The medical center was located on the widest and straightest street of the Mount Song Army headquarters. Across from it was an important location of the Army headquarters, and behind it was an inn on the Plum Path. This inn was the most famous and most luxurious inn in the town. Every day, people would come and go, but many people did not know that the most expensive suite of the inn was only separated by a single wall from the sacred hospital. A middle-aged man sat on a palace armchair, silent and rather gloomy. This did not represent his current mood, but because he had far too many matters to attend to that day. This person's clothes were very simple, but they were made of very good materials. His noble aura was hidden but not revealed. He was probably a merchant. The voice on the other side became extremely weak after passing through the wall. Even the best thief would find it difficult to hear. But this person had his head lowered and was listening very intently. He seemed to be able to hear every detail of the conversation. From these details, one could faintly see that this person had an extraordinary cultivation level and was highly likely to be a true expert. The conversation in the sacred hospital was still continuing. An elderly doctor said, "This is a matter that everyone on the front lines is very concerned about, so there have always been people secretly investigating. What we can now confirm is that the Wenshuitangs are only responsible for delivering and distributing the pills, not the true master of the cinnabar pill. We even believe that the Wenshuitangs don't know who that person is." This sounded rather unbelievable, but it was very likely the truth. And at the very start, everyone had been more concerned about how the Wenshuitangs would distribute the pills. What was the most precious thing in the world? Of course, it was a life that could not be restarted. Medicines that could save lives were naturally treasures that everyone wanted to get their hands on. Having the power to distribute medicine was equivalent to having the power to control the life and death of many people. This kind of power was very scary, and at the same time, it was a very heavy responsibility. Handing over such authority to others, from another perspective, was actually shirking responsibility. It could also be said to be irresponsible. In Enhua's view, the person who could refine the cinnabar pill assuredly had a benevolent heart that cherished the common people. They would definitely not do such a thing. That person did not hand over all the power to the Tang family. He has set up many rules in advance. The cleric smiled at her and said, "First of all, it is strictly forbidden to investigate his background, to ask where the name of the cinnabar pill came from, and to analyze the composition of the medicine." Only now did Enhua understand why, when she said that the orthodoxy and the imperial court should imitate each other, why the room had become so quiet and why everyone had looked at her with such strange gazes. It turned out that this was a rule that had been set by that person in advance, or perhaps it could be said that this was a taboo of the cinnabar pill. So how should it be distributed? How to distribute the cinnabar pill among the Tensum Army headquarters was not a difficult matter. She was not skilled in this aspect, but she could roughly guess that the distribution method should be based on the number of soldiers in each army headquarters. This method was the simplest and fairest. The true difficulty lay in how to distribute the pills to the injured. The Mount Song Army headquarters was one of the larger of the Tensum Army headquarters on the front lines. At most, they would only receive 6 pills each month, and at least 2 in the month when they received the least. And even in the month when the war was at its most stable, when there were no major battles, the number of people heavily injured or on the verge of death was at least 100. Those that the sacred light technique and the doctors can heal will not be given, no matter how serious their injuries are, even if they have lost a leg or an arm, as long as they are not dead, the elderly doctor explained. Whether the cinnabar pill is given or not has nothing to do with age, position, or background. First, it is given to the clergy, and second to the array masters. And Hua quickly understood why it was being distributed this way. The clergy on the front lines could more or less use the sacred light technique, so if one cinnabar pill could save one clergy, it meant that they could save even more people in the future. Array masters had the most important mission on the battlefield and endured the greatest pressure. Their death rate was extremely high, but they were also extremely respected, so it was acceptable for them to be ranked second. The clergy continued, "What follows is the cultivation of the injured and the condition of their injuries. The higher the cultivation and the more serious the injury, the higher the order." And Hua was somewhat confused. Why was it that the higher the cultivation of a cultivator, the easier it was for them to obtain the cinnabar pill? The general expressionlessly explained, "Because this is war. Saving an expert is more meaningful to the human race than saving an ordinary person." From a purely rational point of view, this sentence of course made sense, but wasn't all life equal? Regardless of position, clan background, or age, would there still be a difference in status? And Hua suddenly felt a little cold. A furious voice came from outside the door. "This is not fair. Are the lives of ordinary people like us not lives?" At some point, an injured soldier from the sacred hospital had appeared at the door. He had a crutch under his arm and his trousers were floating in the wind. He had probably lost his leg on the battlefield. It was obvious that this wounded soldier's furious complaints had appeared more than once in the Mount Song Army headquarters and other places. No one paid attention to this wounded soldier. The room was very quiet, and even Hua said nothing, only silently lowered her head. Reality was cruel. That person truly did appear very cold and detached when distributing the cinnabar pill, but no one could deny that it was correct. And Hua raised her head to the clergy and asked, "Then, who will determine the severity of the injuries?" It was obvious that this was the truly important problem, and also the truly troublesome problem. This chapter was 1912, continuing to fill in the gaps from that day's repeated updates. Chapter 748. In Hua's view, determining the severity of an injury was a rather important step, and it was only right that the Li Palace clerics, who were both trustworthy and capable, carry out this task. But in the face of her questioning gaze, the cleric shook his head, hesitating to speak, his emotions rather complex. Right now, the Tang clan steward and the accompanying medical officers are in charge of determining the severity of an injury. The elderly medical officer continued, "That person had already drafted the rules for determining the severity of an injury. The specific rules were written very clearly, and every sacred hospital has a copy. Whether it's us or the steward of the Tang clan, we all have to follow these rules. No one dares to act recklessly." After saying this, he took out a booklet about half a finger thick from his sleeve and handed it to Hua. Hua took the booklet and began to flip through it. As she read more and more, the admiration in her eyes deepened. The cleric had naturally also seen the rules for determining the severity of an injury. He sighed, even without the cinnabar pill, just by looking at these rules for determining the severity of an injury, one can ascertain that that person is a renowned doctor. After reading through the booklet, she returned it to the medical officer and then raised her final and most important question. How does that person guarantee that these rules will be effectively carried out? She had devoted herself to learning in the 13 divisions of Radiant Green and had never concerned herself with outside matters, but she knew that the hearts of men were sinister and that the ways of the world were complex. Moreover, even the most perfect of rules could find loopholes, and this was not even mentioning the fact that this matter involved life and death. There were so many cultivation experts and important figures in the army headquarters on the front lines, so who would care about such things in the heat of the moment? For example, if the grandson of some important figure of the imperial court was heavily injured on the battlefield, he would not have the right to receive the cinnabar pill. But if he was about to die, would anyone dare to not give him the pill? A situation like this truly did occur at Blue Pass. Divine General Fei Dian's nephew stole a cinnabar pill. The cleric glanced at the general and continued, "Later on, Blue Pass was unable to obtain a single cinnabar pill for 2 whole months, causing the morale of the army to waver and the people to seethe with resentment. A mutiny occurred, and a squad that had suffered grievous casualties charged into the divine general's estate and chopped the recuperating general into meat paste. And Hua uneasily asked, this was open robbery, but what if a truly important figure had tampered with the distribution of the pill? The cleric looked into her eyes and said, you probably don't know, but the one responsible for distributing the cinnabar pills at the very beginning was not the Wenshuitangs, but the Hall of Illustrious Persons. And Hua was somewhat shocked. My lady is saying that the orthodoxy was in charge of this matter at the very beginning? Then why was it transferred to the Tang family? Just as you said earlier, someone tried to tamper with the medicine before it was distributed. The cleric lamented. That was a student from the temple seminary who had come to the front lines as reinforcements. This student was extremely talented in cultivation, and was viewed as far superior to Tian Haiyer of the past. Moreover, his character was excellent and he was extremely brave when killing enemies. In a sudden battle with the wolf cavalry, he was heavily injured in order to cover his fellow students' retreat. And Hua asked in confusion, is he still not worthy of a cinnabar pill? That's a very remote military fort. He only managed to get one cinnabar pill in 3 months, and his luck is very bad. What do you mean? There's a rogue array master who's also heavily injured and on the verge of death. He's ranked in front of him. I see. When the bishop of the temple seminary learned of this matter, he asked a cardinal of the Hall of Illustrious Persons to tamper with the distribution, writing his name in front of that rogue array master's. To the Li Palace, a talented and promising young student was naturally many times more important than a rogue cultivator without a sect or sect. And Hua would not do such a thing, but she could understand why the bishop of the temple seminary would do such a thing. After that temple seminary student took the cinnabar pill, he truly did recover, and there were no side effects left behind. And that rogue array master, dead. This was the inevitable fate of that array master. These 2 plain words made one feel a sense of desolation and helplessness. And Hua was quiet for a while, then asked, and then? Since it was the bishop of the temple seminary and the cardinal of the Hall of Illustrious Persons who had acted, whether it was a change in the order or some other insider transaction, they would not have left behind any evidence. She even thought of an even darker possibility. For example, some powerful figure might even secretly kill those injured who were ranked in front of them for the cinnabar pill. That military fort was not affected in the slightest. Just like in the past, it was given a cinnabar pill every 3 months. The cleric's tone suddenly turned solemn. But from then on, the Hall of Illustrious Persons was never able to obtain a single cinnabar pill. No one knows how that person came to know of this matter, nor did that person give any evidence. He only took back the authority to distribute the cinnabar pill from the Hall of Illustrious Persons and gave it to the Wenshuitangs. The room was quiet. Everyone still remembered this major event from last year. The cleric sighed. Upon hearing of this matter, Archbishop Mao Chuyu flew into a thunderous rage and requested Linghai Jiwang to begin cleaning up the Hall of Illustrious Persons. That cardinal was immediately executed, the bishop of the temple seminary was exiled from the orthodoxy, and many other important figures also met with great misfortune because of this matter. And Hua knew that an extremely experienced and authoritative cardinal had died in the Hall of Illustrious Persons. She had originally believed that he had died of illness, but she had not expected that it had originated from this matter. The situation between the imperial court and the orthodoxy was no longer as tense as it was 2 years ago, but the 2 sides were still in a standoff. On the front lines of the war with the demons, the imperial court's words naturally carried the most weight. In these circumstances, the orthodoxy had to treasure any opportunity to display its strength, let alone the authority to distribute the cinnabar pill. That cardinal and the bishop of the temple seminary had offended the master of the cinnabar pill, causing the orthodoxy to lose this extremely precious resource. Even 10,000 deaths could not atone for this crime. Mao Chuyu was famed for his benevolence, but his subordinates had caused such a major incident, so his rage and harsh punishment were completely understandable. From that point on, no one dared to have any ideas about the cinnabar pill, and no one dared to fake injuries and then try to hide it. Incidents of stealing medicine also decreased. The cleric continued, because these were the rules set down by that person. Yes, no one knows who that person is. Perhaps he's just an ordinary doctor in the countryside who has no way to protect his own rules, but he has the cinnabar pill, so his words carry weight. The bloody incident in the Hall of Illustrious Persons has already proven this point, and the Wenshui Tangs, in order to maintain their right to distribute the medicine, are not afraid to kill someone for the sake of that person's rules. No matter where you hide, who can survive if the Tang clan wants to kill you? This chapter 1992 continues to fill in the gaps from the repeated updates. Chapter 749. No matter how miraculous a medicine was, if it could not be used by one, it was no different from trash. To the young array master on his deathbed, the cinnabar pill was this sort of existence. The general no longer looked at him. He turned and walked out of the room, stopping as he passed Hua and the cleric. After asking them to take good care of him, he sternly said a few words. I will not say that this person is fishing for fame, but this person is assuredly scheming something great. Everyone understood the general's meaning. Whether that person had found this divine recipe from an ancient text or had developed it through his talent in medicine, if he truly cared about the safety of the human race, bemoaned the state of the universe and pitied the fate of mankind, then the most appropriate thing to do was to take out the recipe. Ever since she had confirmed that the cinnabar pill truly did have miraculous effects and had saved many people who should have been alive, Hua had developed an extremely favorable impression of that mysterious person that no one had ever met. She was not willing to believe that this person was a schemer or had other motives, but she also could not refute the general's words. That person could only take out 1 bottle of cinnabar pills every month, and several dozen pills were still too few when compared to the needs of the soldiers on the front lines. She believed that this person was already doing his best, but because he could not gather enough rare ingredients, or because his abilities were limited, he could not increase the production. However, as long as he was willing to hand over the recipe, these problems could be easily resolved. Just as she had thought at the very beginning, no matter how rare the ingredients required for this pill were, the orthodoxy and the imperial court would assuredly be able to find them. If the orthodoxy and the imperial court could mass-produce this pill, the human race would obtain an enormous advantage in this war and the future of the continent would be bright. Of course, to that person this was also of great benefit. He would receive the gratitude of the entire world and countless merit. Even if he could not cultivate, he would still become a true saint. So why was he not willing to do this? The middle-aged man sat in his chair, quietly drinking tea. The inn owner stood in front of him, not daring to move. Upon hearing the voices coming from behind the wall, a mocking smile appeared on his lips. Saint? It's just hoarding. The inn owner pressed his body even lower, not daring to say anything. Hoarding rare goods was a method used by merchants to sell their goods. How much was the cinnabar pill worth? In terms of curative effects, it could regrow bones and cure the dead. Naturally, it was a priceless treasure. But in reality, from the moment the cinnabar pill first appeared in Blue Pass, there had never been a price. If you wanted to obtain it, you didn't need any money. All you needed to do was wait, if you had the life to wait until then. Whether it was the master of the cinnabar pill, the Hall of Illustrious Persons, or the current Wenshui Tangs, none of them could obtain any profit from the cinnabar pill. In the view of some people, there was simply no reason for the Wenshui Tangs to offend so many factions and powerful figures for the sake of a pill that they could not obtain any profit from. However, in the eyes of truly knowledgeable people, this idea was undoubtedly extremely foolish. The master of the cinnabar pill had determined the rules, but the rules were dead, and there were always some places that could be used. For instance, if two array masters were both heavily injured and on the verge of death, whether it was in terms of cultivation or past military merit, they were all very similar, so how could they be determined in the order? At times like this, the Tang family was in control. Even if this kind of authority didn't appear all the time and seemed very insignificant, it was still as vast as the ocean. No matter how much one valued it, it wouldn't be too much. The Tang family would never give up on this resource. In order to ensure the long-term preservation of this resource, they would do their utmost to satisfy that person's conditions, including enforcing the rules for that person. After the coup of the Mausoleum of Books, the Tang family's status in the human race had risen even higher, already leaving the Tianhai clan far behind and becoming the de facto #1 clan of the Great Zhou dynasty. Now that they held the right to distribute the cinnabar pill, their status had once more been solidified, even making many factions faintly fear them. A normal clan would have been perfectly satisfied with this position, but the Wenshui Tangs were no normal clan. They were the earliest merchants of the continent. Merchants could never be satisfied, they were insatiably greedy. Whether this was praise or criticism, business was business, so the Tang family naturally could not be satisfied with the profits brought by the cinnabar pill. Compared to the miraculous effects of the cinnabar pill, the current profits were rather small, and they were not the leader. That mysterious person was the true owner, and the Tang family could not accept this. Whether it was armaments, provisions, cities, treasures, or medicines, the Tang family had to be the sole owner of any business on the continent, or at the very least, the major shareholder. Starting from tens of thousands of years ago, greed for profit and a valiant desire for control had been the strongest colors of the Wenshui Tangs, even the goal of their existence. These 2 points had long since been engraved into the blood of every member of the clan, becoming an obsession. Thus, even with the bloody incident of the Hall of Illustrious Persons, they still wanted to obtain even more from the cinnabar pill. More than anyone else, they wanted to know just who the true master of the cinnabar pill was. Compared to the other factions of the world, they were unquestionably the closest to that person. Perhaps there were several layers of fog between them, but they could already faintly see the truth. Yes, this inn was the property of the Wenshui Tangs. The middle-aged man was the 17th master of the Wenshui Tangs. He had come all the way from Wenshui to the Mount Song Army headquarters precisely to find the secret hidden behind the cinnabar pill. A respectful and fearful voice came from outside the door. "The goods from Black Mountain have arrived." The Tang's 17th master slightly arched his brows, his eyes brightening. He rose from his chair and, under the guidance of the innkeeper, arrived at a secret room in the rear courtyard of the inn. A large black stone table was placed in the center of the secret room. On the stone table was the goods that the Wenshui Tangs had paid an enormous price to transport from the Black Mountain Army headquarters. It was a corpse. The victim was a man. He was severely injured. His face and neck were charred black, which was obvious that he had been burned by the poisonous demonic flame. His half-unbuttoned clothes were obviously of military style. His fingers were long and slender, and his knuckles were slightly bulging. There were still faint traces of starlight in the miserable wound on his chest and abdomen that had not completely dissipated. From these details, one could see that this was a star condensation cultivator who had died in battle with demon experts. He was highly likely to be a general of the Great Zhou army. The Tang's 17th master took a pure white handkerchief from his sleeve and covered his nose and mouth, using his eyes to signal the innkeeper to step forward. The innkeeper walked up to the black stone table, took out a sharp knife, and began to cut at the chest and abdomen of the corpse, starting from the already existing wound. With a soft swish, the edge of the knife cut open the corpse's stomach. An unpleasant green liquid gushed out and dripped onto the table. The Tang's 17th master slightly frowned, somewhat disgusted as he tightened his grip on the handkerchief, but he did not shift his gaze. In front of him, The innkeeper had seemed like a particularly mediocre servant, but at this moment, he seemed like an extremely experienced coroner. Without hesitation, the innkeeper extended his hand into the corpse's stomach. After searching for a while, he took out a small bag. This bag was made of some unknown material. It was neither leather nor paper, and its surface was very smooth. It felt extremely thin and soft, and one could faintly make out a round object within. This object could be a stone, could be a pearl, could also be a pill. Chapter 750. A few days ago, I posted a few chapters of 1,900 characters. I always thought that this would give me 900 characters for free, but yesterday, after Dreammaker's reminder, I learned that the current method of charging has changed. It's no longer free for less than 1,000 characters, for example, 1,900 characters, but only free for a chapter of less than 1,000 characters. Then I want to directly post 2 chapters of 900 characters worth of free chapters in my acceptance speech, but I'm worried that I won't be able to see my acceptance speech on the QQ Reading app, so I better ask the Lord Editor how to do it. The small pouch was very slender. Presumably, when it was in the body of that expert of the great Zhou army, the upper half was probably in the esophagus, and the opening was probably in the throat. There also seemed to be some sort of mechanism hidden above. The Wenshuitangs had even created the yellow paper umbrella, so they probably had a way to completely isolate anything from the outside world once it entered the pouch. The shopkeeper did not immediately begin. Instead, he very earnestly, even somewhat tediously, began to wash his hands. Only after confirming that his hands were as clean as new and then using 4 towels to wipe them clean without a single trace of moisture did he carefully untie the pouch and take out the item inside. It was a pill about the size of a pea and dark red, just like blood. Perhaps because it had been contaminated by the moisture in the corpse, there were some slight ulcerations on its surface. At this sight, a hint of heartache appeared in the shopkeeper's eyes, and the Tang's 17th master's face also turned gloomy. "It should be fine," the shopkeeper said in a trembling voice, then hurriedly placed the dark red pill into the basin that had been prepared beforehand. The basin was filled with wheat bran. Of course, it was no ordinary wheat bran. It had been filtered and dehumidified many times, so it was ivory white and very dry, devoid of any moisture. The shopkeeper scooped up the wheat bran and placed it over the pill, then used his hands to lightly rub it. His movements were exceptionally gentle, like he was caressing a lover. The pill lightly rolled around in the wheat bran. With the passage of time, it became completely clean, its dark red color becoming more and more distinct, even giving off a soul-stealing feeling. The Wenshuitangs did not have a complete understanding of this pill. They only knew that it would melt upon contact with water and would be extremely difficult to preserve. At this point, the shopkeeper finally confirmed that there were no problems with this method of cleaning, and his gaze softened as he looked at the pill. Of course, it still could not compare to his gaze at the Tang's 17th master. He beamed with joy and said, "Lord 17th is extraordinarily intelligent. This method is indeed effective." The Tang's 17th master paid no attention to this person's flattery. He took a snow-white, brand-new handkerchief from his sleeve and placed it in his hand. He took the pill and earnestly examined it for a very long time, until his eyes began to blaze with passion. He suddenly sensed a change in his mood and slightly creased his brow. He sternly asked, "Is this pill really that mystical?" The shopkeeper did not notice the subtle change in his mood and said, "That is indeed the case. Otherwise, why would Lord 17th be troubled to personally make this trip?" He was trying to curry favor with this master, but when he said this, his gaze couldn't help but fall on the pill in the other party's palm, and then he licked his lips. This unconscious movement showed that he was a little nervous, and also revealed the greed in his heart. The Tang's 17th master noticed this, and his lips perked up as he asked, "Do you know what this is?" The shopkeeper's expression flickered as he thought, Isn't this the legendary cinnabar pill? This isn't a pill, nor is it wealth. It's power. The Tang's 17th master replied, to be able to decide life and death is the greatest authority in the world. The shopkeeper praised, 17th master's words are extraordinary. The Tang's 17th master impassively said, if some people covet this authority but do not have the strength to match it, then they are seeking death. The shopkeeper's body slightly stiffened and he lowered his head, no longer daring to glance at the pill. People entered the secret room one after another, surrounding the black stone table. These people included the guardian of the original Pavilion of Heavenly Secrets, two of Fengyang County's most famous doctors, a cleric of unknown origins that the Tang clan had hired with a large sum of money, and a doctor who had taken the Tang Old Master's pulse in Wenshui. Regardless of their status, all of them had the same expression on their faces. It was an expression that seemed calm, but was actually extremely nervous and somewhat stiff. They were all looking at the red pill on the black table, not just once, but many times, for a very long time. They were nervous because they knew the origins of this pill, so they naturally felt a greedy desire to seize it, but they knew that they absolutely could not do this. One of the doctors from Fengyang County, out of fear that he would not be able to resist this temptation, forcefully turned his head away. Look, smell, ask, and feel. These were the things that doctors needed to do when treating a patient. Although they were not looking at an illness, but medicine, they could not escape these methods. They had already looked at the pill for a very long time, so the next step was naturally to smell it. The old doctor from Wenshui glanced at the Tang's 17th master. This old doctor had specially taken the pulse of the Tang Old Master. If not for the fact that today's matter was too urgent, not even the Tang's 17th master would have been able to invite him from Wenshui City. The Tang's 17th master was naturally rather polite to him, saying, Sir Yang, please do as you please. The old doctor from Wenshui, who was addressed as Sir Yang, did not stand on ceremony. He lowered his head, placed it on the red pill, and took in a deep breath. In the next moment, Sir Yang's face turned red and his eyes became hazy. It was like he had drunk wine, like he had entered a room of orchids, and he seemed to be intoxicated and confused about where he was. The guardian of the Pavilion of Heavenly Secrets slightly creased his brow and coughed. Sir Yang came to his senses and said, the main ingredient truly is cinnabar, but there's also immortal grass, cinnamon, angelica, goji berries, cloves, rock sugar. To be able to identify so many ingredients with just a sniff, this person's attainments in the medical path were truly extraordinary. As the Tang's 17th master listened to these ingredients, he creased his brow, thinking, are they going to stew meat? Why is there rock sugar? He had no idea that these rather common ingredients would even be added to stew meat. It was precisely because their medicinal properties were moderate and mild that they were perfect as supplementary ingredients. The vast majority of pills in the world contain them. As for rock sugar, it was like stir-frying rice, having the effect of catalyzing the medicinal energy and also neutralizing the bitterness. The guardian of the Pavilion of Heavenly Secrets and the two famed doctors of Fengyang were both members of the medical path, so they naturally did not find this strange. They also came over and sniffed, then reported the names of a few more ingredients: Huai yam, cloves, and desert sistant. Seeing the still wet ink on the paper, the doctors muttered to themselves for a while, then began to discuss among themselves. Finally, they said to the Tang's 17th master, we still have to act. From start to finish, they had first looked and then smelled, but not a single one of them had dared to touch it, because they all knew how precious this pill was. Now that they had to act, they all agreed. The one responsible for speaking was Sir Yang, as he was a member of the Wenshui Tangs, so it was more convenient for him to speak. When the cinnabar pill first appeared, the rules set down by that person were not complete enough. The great Zhou army and the Hall of Illustrious Persons had once worked together to secretly keep a few pills, hoping to analyze and deduce the composition of the pill. However, they had wasted 3 whole pills and still had not been able to completely understand the ingredient. The doctors that had appeared in the secret room today were all extraordinary individuals, but how could they rely on just looking and smelling? The Tang 17th Master had long since mentally prepared himself for this, but he still couldn't help but feel somewhat disappointed, because this meant that the cinnabar pill would very quickly be wasted. "Be careful and don't waste it," he said with a gloomy expression. "These are 2 lives." Chapter 751. This was naturally referring to the cinnabar pill. The people in the room were somewhat confused. The cinnabar pill could cure the dead and regrow bones. No matter how severe the injury, it could cure it, so it was naturally equivalent to 1 life. But why did the Tang 17th Master say that it was 2 lives? If it was said that it was worth it no matter how many people died for something as important as the cinnabar pill, then it should be said that it was worth many lives. This pill can save a person's life. In order to obtain this pill, my Tang family has also sacrificed a person's life to exchange for it. The Tang 17th Master thought of the corpse that had already been burned to ash, and his face turned even gloomier. The deceased had been a spy the Tang clan had nurtured in the great Zhou army many years in advance. He had a very promising future, and was already a well-known deputy general of the Black Mountain Army. If the Tang clan had properly helped him develop, it was impossible to say whether he would have become a divine general in a few decades. But now, he had died for the sake of this pill. It had been 9 whole months since the Tang clan had obtained the authority to distribute the cinnabar pill from the Hall of Illustrious Persons. The Tang clan could no longer suppress their innate greed and attempted to obtain even greater benefit. In order to understand the composition of this pill, they had acted with extreme caution in order to deceive the mysterious supplier. After careful calculations, the Tang clan confirmed that the deputy general had the right to obtain a cinnabar pill and had him heavily injured on the battlefield. As expected, the Black Mountain Army had given one of the cinnabar pills to the deputy general. According to the rules, the deputy general wasted no time. Under the watchful eyes of many people, he took the pill, but he did not survive because his luck was truly terrible. The moment the cinnabar pill entered his throat, he breathed his last. Many people felt that this was a great pity. A few people felt that it was a pity for the deputy general's luck, but the vast majority felt that since the deputy general was already dead, there was no need to waste a cinnabar pill. Everyone knew that the cinnabar pill would dissolve upon contact with water, its medicinal properties dissipating into nothingness. Once it entered the deputy general's stomach, it would be difficult to regenerate. It was precisely because they were certain of this that they did not think too much of it other than sighing and cursing. Only the Wenshui Tangs knew that the deputy general's body had long ago been filled with a thin pouch made of some unknown material. And after that deputy general took the cinnabar pill, whether or not he was willing to sever his own meridians and die, he was doomed to die. This was because 2 old guardians of the Tang clan had been watching him when he collapsed. The general was buried according to the custom of the old county, but that night the new grave was dug up. Today, his corpse and the cinnabar pill had been delivered to the Mount Song Army headquarters, to the Tang 17th Master's eyes. The Tang 17th Master said nothing more, but everyone in the room could sense his mood, and their expressions turned even graver. The guardian of the Pavilion of Heavenly Secrets picked up a silver spoon and crushed the crimson pill in a porcelain bowl. Then, he slowly ground the pill into powder and divided it into 5 portions. Each of the medical experts took a portion of the powder and took out their own methods and abilities that they would normally never show to others, as well as those strange tools, and began to study it. Researching and distinguishing the ingredients was a process that had to be gone through when imitating a medicine. It was extremely dry and dull, so it seemed especially long. The Tang 17th Master remained in the secret room the entire time, not taking a single step out. After some time had passed, a red ray of light seeped in from the ventilation hole in the west. It was already dusk. This task was finally completed. The people raised their heads, either dripping medicine into their bloodshot eyes or twisting their necks to loosen their aching bodies. But in this seemingly relaxed and calm environment, a tense atmosphere still lingered. No one spoke. The Tang 17th Master's expression grew even gloomier, just like that dark wall that the light of dusk from the west could not reach. In the end, he could not allow this situation to continue for too long. The old doctor from Wenshui somewhat tiredly coughed and wrote down the ingredients he had identified on a piece of paper. The other medical experts also noted down the components of the medicinal herbs that they had determined. The Tang 17th Master's brow was still furrowed, but his expression was much more relaxed. This was because he could clearly see that the ingredients they had written down were basically the same in proportion to their ingredient. It truly is a never-before-seen pill recipe. It's extremely extraordinary. It seems simple and crude, but it actually hides a supreme principle. If used to staunch bleeding and cleanse one's star, it should be extremely effective. The old doctor from Wenshui shook his head and said, "But it definitely can't do what the rumors say." The Tang 17th Master said nothing, because he knew that there was bound to be a follow-up, or perhaps an explanation. There is one ingredient that this old one analyzed for a long time, but he was still unable to determine what it was. The old doctor from Wenshui, Dr. Yang, glanced at the guardian from the Pavilion of Heavenly Secrets and the two doctors from Fengyang County. "I think that everyone else is the same." The three medical experts nodded, their expressions somewhat perplexed. Dr. Yang continued, "There is no ingredient in this world that the four of us cannot identify, which can only mean that this is perhaps not a medicinal ingredient, at least not before that person refined the cinnabar pill. Now, it seems that the wonders of the cinnabar pill probably rest on this item." The Tang 17th Master stepped forward, took the glass from the guardian from the Pavilion of Heavenly Secrets, and carefully examined a small disc on the table. The small disc was a remnant of the pill that had already been separated, melted with water, and then steamed. If one looked at it with the naked eye, it would appear to be ordinary medicinal dregs. Even in the eyes of the Tang 17th Master, it was just a slightly finer powder. But under the glass produced by the Pavilion of Heavenly Secrets, this powder was finally revealed in its truest form. The vast desert was littered with square stones, as well as a few red crystalline shards. Compared to the barren desert of dregs, they were extremely few in number. If one were to observe more closely, one would be able to see that these red crystal fragments were formed by countless strands of glass. Visually, they looked extremely tough and indestructible. If one stared at these red crystal fragments for a longer period of time, one could even sense the terrifying light energy contained in them. These red shards were the reason the cinnabar pill was so dark red, and they were also the answer to the question that all the medical experts had racked their brains for. After some time, the Tang 17th Master raised his head and asked the crowd, "Just what is this? Or what could it be?" The priest, who had been silent since entering the room, finally opened his mouth to speak. "It looks a little like blood coral." The words blood coral caused the medical experts to reveal shocked expressions, and then a pensive look appeared on their faces. The Tang 17th Master was also very shocked, but after a few moments, he firmly declared, "This is impossible." This cleric had once been a bishop of the Hall of Illustrious Persons. In the purge led by Mao Chuyu and Linghai Jiwang, he had luckily managed to preserve his life, but he had been expelled from the Li Palace. He was in charge of refining pills in the Hall of Illustrious Persons and had once come into contact with the cinnabar pill. Logically speaking, his judgment was very trustworthy, but he could not convince the Tang 17th Master. Because the Tang 17th Master just so happened to know that the only blood coral in the world was in the old estate of the Wenshui Tang clan. "Hello everyone. I've finished asking the editor, and now there's nothing I can do. Then let's do the actuarial calculations." There's no need to worry about the Genesis Chinese network. According to Qidian's current rules, 2,300 words should be charged 9 Qidian coins. Erasing the odd part, we'll charge 6. This way we can save 9 Qidian coins per chapter. Because the repeated chapters seem to have charged 6 Qidian coins, I will update 7 chapters of 2,300 words in the future. If there's a mistake in the details, we'll talk about it. Alright, now that we've chatted up to this point, there are definitely many friends who will say that I'm not at all carefree. Yes, I can't be carefree. I don't want to be talked about by others for the sake of a few pennies. It's just like these past few days giving me a headache. In addition, the title of the chapter is from an author I like very much. I recommend his book to everyone. Chapter 752. Seeing the composition of the cinnabar pill, does anyone think of something? Oh, don't think too much. I'm talking about something that's common in life. Only after that novel incident in Wenshui City did the Tang 17th master begin to manage the clan's medicine shop. However, he was extremely knowledgeable, and the blood coral was far too famous. It was not a true coral, but a crystallization of dragon blood. Moreover, it was no ordinary crystallization of dragon blood. Only the true blood of a golden dragon or a black frost dragon could condense into a crystal. To the dragon race, the blood coral was the most important and sacred object. They would not allow anyone to possess it, not even the great Zhou imperial palace or the Li palace. The Wenshui Tangs, because of a story from countless years ago, were fortunate enough to possess a blood coral the size of a forearm. It was also hidden in a secret room in their old estate, never daring to see the light of day. The bishop listened to the Tang 17th master's assertion and hesitantly said, "If someone secretly infiltrates the southern sea." The Tang 17th master shook his head. All the dragon race view the blood coral as their own life. Even if Zhou Dufu were to come back to life, he would not be able to obtain it while surrounded by dragons. The bishop was confused. But for such abundant energy and such a thick scent of life, what else could it be other than crystallization of dragon blood? The Tang 17th master pensively asked, "Could it be sacred light? This strange object has no divine qi, and its energy is far too berserk." The bishop shook his head. Moreover, sacred light is formless and immaterial, extremely difficult to materialize. Not even the 5 archbishops of the Li Palace could do it, unless they offered up essence blood. Sir Yang agreed, correct? The ingredients we identified were probably used to neutralize the destructive power of the berserk energy. Crucially, according to the scriptures of the Church, materializing sacred light requires an archbishop to offer up all his essence blood. How could so many cinnabar pills be produced endlessly? The famed doctor of Fengyang asked in shock. Doesn't that mean that if you want to use the crystallization of sacred light to save someone, you can only save them once, and that archbishop will also have to die? The bishop solemnly replied, correct. The starry sky has always been fair, and life has never been noble or lowly. The Tang 17th master was quiet for a very long time, seemingly pondering something. In the end, he did not ask any further questions. "You still have 1 day and 1 night. After saying this, he walked out of the secret room and came to the slightly cold courtyard. His gaze passed over the bare branches and landed on the distant and gloomy sky. The shopkeeper and the bishop came behind him and felt his current mood. They vaguely guessed what he was worried about and could not help but remain silent. The Wenshui Tangs had paid such an enormous price to invite these renowned doctors, but their true goal was not to analyze the composition of the medicine to find a way to replicate the cinnabar pill. The Hall of Illustrious Persons and the Great Zhou Army had already failed, proving that this path was a dead end, or perhaps too difficult to walk. What the Tang clan truly wanted to do was to use these medicinal ingredients to find out where the cinnabar pill had come from. Immortal reeds were produced everywhere, but the medicinal efficacy varied slightly from place to place. Angelica could be found all over the continent, but one could always find traces of it in the circulation of medicinal herbs. There was also clove, aphrodisiac. Everything in the world would inevitably leave behind traces. The Tang clan did business all over the world and possessed unimaginable resources and network. It was the easiest for them to capture these traces and then find the place where the traces began or ended. If they could find out where the cinnabar pill had come from, they would naturally be able to find that person. In this war between humans and demons, that person was far too important. Even if this war was removed, that person would still be important. Whether it was the Tang clan, the Orthodoxy, or the imperial court, they all naturally wanted to control this person. If we trace back the 34 ingredients, we should be able to find the place where the cinnabar pill was made, but even if we find that person, we might not be able to control him. It was obvious that the bishop knew the Tang clan's true goal. With a slightly uneasy tone, he said, "At the very beginning, the two divine generals of the Hall of Illustrious Persons and Blue Pass made similar attempts. Although they were not as close to that person as we were, they should have found some clues, and even made the entire plan." The shopkeeper glanced at him and asked, "If we can't control him, we'll just kill him?" The bishop nodded. This sounded like a very unreasonable matter, but in this sinister human world, it was a matter of course. Such a mystical pill, such an important person. Either they would be used or they would die, so they could not fall into the hands of others, especially enemies. Because the military was taking this war into consideration, its attitude was relatively conservative, and it did not participate too deeply. However, the Hall of Illustrious Persons was very worried that that person would be controlled by the imperial court, and they also knew that that person would not be willing to be found and would assuredly be enraged, so they made arrangements to kill that person, and then. A hint of fear appeared on the bishop's face as he said in a trembling voice, 33 bishops of the Xuanyang Church died in a single night, their deaths extremely wretched. The shopkeeper's expression abruptly changed. What a tough response, what a powerful move. It was obvious that the Xuanyang Church, which had lost 33 bishops in a single night, had been specifically responsible for carrying out this task. The bishop turned to the Tang 17th master and said, "Mao Qiyu and Linghai Jiwang's purge of the capital might have been an attempt to conceal this matter." These words had an unspoken meaning. The Tang 17th master was silent, but he was thinking about something else. In truth, he had always had a guess as to who the master of the cinnabar pill was. Just like some people, he had also wondered if it might be the one who had disappeared. If those red crystals brimming with violent energy really were the legendary blood coral, then the answer was even more certain. He was the Tang Third Master's blood brother, his most trusted subordinate, so he knew even more secrets. The one who had disappeared currently had a dragon at his side, and it just so happened to be a black frost dragon. But it was only today that he learned that 33 bishops of the Xuanyang Church had died in a single night. This made him somewhat doubtful of this judgment. That person might have had such powerful methods and the right to make such a tough response, but that person had never been so callous and emotionless, not to mention that those bishops had always been his subordinates. That person was unquestionably an important figure, but he had never had the self-awareness of an important figure. Moreover, based on the Tang clan's analysis, if that person was still alive, he was probably in the south. Last year, a bitter battle had taken place on the snowy plains. The black-armored heavy cavalry of the great Zhou dynasty and the wolf cavalry of the demon race had fought endlessly on the vast and boundless plains. No one had expected that that person who had vanished from the continent for so long would appear on the battlefield with a torrential rain of swords. After a bloody battle, he reversed the situation, but he was heavily injured by the terrifyingly powerful demon General Hai Di. Thus, he once more vanished from the battlefield, never to be seen again. Only a few important figures like the Tang 17th master knew that after that person was heavily injured by Hai Di, he had been ambushed by 3 human experts. This matter was naturally very shameless and could not be known by anyone, so the imperial court had kept it extremely secret. Thus, the Tang clan concluded that if that person had really managed to survive, he was naturally in the south. It was most likely Holy Maiden Peak, but it could also be Scalatree Manor, or even Mountley, because only these places could protect his life. If that person was in the south, then the cinnabar pill that had already appeared in the armies on the front lines for a year naturally had nothing to do with him. So why were there so many clues pointing at him? Could it be that the master of the cinnabar pill, hiding behind the curtains, wanted to use that person's name to do something big? Chapter 753. The path of merchants forever pursued realism. Only those who fell into the bag would be happy, and any fog, once torn apart, would have no value. The Tang's 17th master no longer thought about this matter, deciding to first find that person. His gaze moved from the shopkeeper to the bishop and he said, "The third master's orders were extremely clear this time. This person must be found and then controlled. If not, I will die, all of you will die, and you will die an extremely wretched death." This bishop was a foreshadowing the Tang clan had planted in the orthodoxy. Now that he had been expelled from the capital, although he had luckily survived, he could no longer be of any greater use. If he could not display his loyalty, ability, or usefulness in the matter of the cinnabar pill, then the fate that awaited him would undoubtedly be very unpleasant. The bishop paled upon hearing this, while the shopkeeper broke out in a cold sweat. The two of them were well aware that this matter was now involved in the struggle for power within the Wenshui clan. Their status was not enough for them to know all the inside information, but they were well aware of how many storms had occurred in Wenshui City in the last 2 years. The struggle between the branches was growing more and more intense, even bitter. Although no one had died yet, there was already the faint scent of blood. The most important sign was the relapse of the chief branch's old illness, and at the beginning of this year, the increasingly famous Tang third master had given birth to a son. The Wenshui Tangs were a clan that had existed for 1,000 generations, so they had their own rules. At the beginning, the old master had decided to have the chief branch inherit the family business, so Tang 36 was the only son and grandson of the Tang clan. Before he formally inherited the family business, the old master forbade the other branches from having children of the third generation. This rule was extremely cruel, but fortunately, the masters of the various branches had all succeeded in their cultivation and could live for several hundred years, so there was no rush. This rule was finally broken at the beginning of the year. The Tang third master had given birth to a son. This was the only bloodline of the Tang clan's third generation besides Tang 36. What did this mean? Had the old master finally completely changed his mind about the succession of the clan? Had the chief branch fallen out of favor? Or was it that the Tang third master no longer had the patience to wait and had clearly and valiantly expressed his ambition to seize power? Of course, ambition had to be built on strength. Right now, with third master as the leader of the Tang family's branches, they had already gained a clear advantage in this battle. In the massive upheaval in the capital 2 years ago, and in the behind-the-scenes dealings even earlier, the Tang third master represented Shang Xingzhou in moving back and forth between the various factions of the continent, communicating with them. He played an extremely important role in overthrowing Tianhai's rule, and in the crucial battle to destroy the capital's imperial design, he played an irreplaceable role. In this major event, the Tang third master's performance was perfect in every aspect, and he was also very low-key. While bringing the Wenshui clan unimaginable benefits, he also greatly conformed to the Tang clan's demeanor, obtaining the support and even worship of many clansmen. If it wasn't for the fact that winter of that year had failed to kill Wang Po, perhaps he would have already replaced Tang 36's father. At this moment, when the shopkeeper and the bishop heard that this was the Tang third master's order, they instantly lost all thoughts of begging for mercy. Then they had to hurry and find that person. If they couldn't control him, they could just kill him. Perhaps it was because the Tang Third Master was too famous for his coldness, or perhaps it was because Master 17 had been sitting in the courtyard the entire time, personally watching over them, but the analysis and deciphering of the pill proceeded much faster than expected. By the evening of the same day, the medical experts and the shopkeepers in charge of transportation and local products of the Tang clan finally came to a preliminary conclusion. Where a certain herb was produced, where it was transported, where it passed, where it could only be found, and how much of a certain herb was consumed in a year in Tianliang County. Countless pieces of information were gathered together, and then, accompanied by the clattering of the abacus, were transformed into numbers on a piece of paper, ultimately pointing to an extremely unremarkable place on the map. That place was the northeastern part of Tianliang County, a place rarely visited by humans. The weather was cold and the ground was frozen. Amidst the mountains was a small town called Gaoyang, which was almost completely abandoned. In the sacred hospital, separated by a wall from the inn, as the injuries of the injured gradually improved, the mood became more and more relaxed. In the deepest room, the mood was still oppressive and gloomy. The young array master still had not awoken. His slightly tanned face was now very pale, and his breathing was short and weak. And Hua sat by the window, her eyes closed in rest. She was very exhausted. According to the orders of the Mount Song Army Headquarters, she, the clergy of the sacred hospital, and the military doctor were doing their utmost to treat the young array master. It was now certain that the young array master could last for another 7 days, 2 more days than the clergy had originally predicted. This was naturally because of her arrival. The sacred light technique of the 13 divisions of radiant green was not one bit weaker than the divine technique of the Li Palace, or else Holy Maiden Su Yorong would not have chosen this place to study. But this was still not enough, because the cinnabar pill would only appear in 10 days. The young array master was first on the list of medicines to be received by the Mount Song Army Headquarters. As long as there was medicine, he could obtain it and survive. But Hua knew that no matter how hard she, the clergy, and the military doctor tried, they could not make him last until then. Hope was right before her eyes, and it seemed to be getting closer and closer, but if one carefully looked at it, it was still so far away. In the end, there would always be times when one's strength was limited. This fact could easily make one feel sorrow, even despair. Ending her meditation, Hua opened her eyes and walked to the edge of the cavern to observe the young array master's current condition. Perhaps it was because he had not rested for a day and night and was constantly being cared for, but she felt that the young array master's appearance was getting clearer and clearer. How could she help him survive? Was there any other hope? Like asking the Archbishop of the Li Palace to act? No, even if those important figures were willing to act for the young array master, they would not be able to get here in time, much less the current Li Palace. Other than dispatching a considerable number of clergy and doctors to the northern front lines, the Li Palace was abnormally inconspicuous. From morning to dusk, from spring to autumn, and then to winter, the doors of the hall were tightly shut and heavily guarded. A prefect of the orthodoxy like Mao Chuyu would not easily take a single step out of the Li Palace. This situation had already persisted for 2 years. Because it had already been 2 years since the Pope had left the capital. No one knew where the young Pope was, or even if he was still alive. Hua paid no attention to what was happening outside her window, nor did she know of the current state of the imperial court or Xuelao city. She only knew that the war had been going on for the last 2 years, and that many people had already died. The sects and noble clans of the south had played an extremely important role in this war. From the Tianhai Divine Empress to the venerable Taoist Master Shang Xingzhou, they had all placed great importance on the confluence of the north and south. The new generation of cultivators had also begun to formally step onto the stage of history. The youths of the Mount Li Sword sect, Scholatry Manor, and the 6 Ivies had displayed the most outstanding performances. Of course, compared to the disturbance caused by that person on the battlefield for the first time, these were all playing house, and not even worth mentioning. Although they were all youths, they were still different. That was the first time he appeared before the people of the world after leaving the capital, and also the last time. It was a clear and crisp autumn day. 10,000 horses galloped and the smoke of war rose from all directions. His 1,000 swords struck out simultaneously, countless demon soldiers sprayed their blood and died, the plains transformed into a sea of blood. In this sea of solemn and chaotic chi, Demon General Hai-Di struck with all his strength, tearing apart the clouds and splitting the earth, causing the heavens and earth to change color. The young pope collapsed with heavy injuries and then vanished once more. It was as if he had come to the battlefield, appeared in front of so many people, took such a great risk, killed so many demons, shed so much blood, and suffered such heavy injuries, just to tell the world and some people that he was still alive. This was truly like a child playing house. Chapter 754. In the chapters written a few days ago, the Tang's second master was written as third master, mainly because I always wanted to make Tang 36 the third young master in the future. I admit my mistake, the manuscript has been changed. Also, I haven't applied for annual leave. Haha, anyway, I'm just writing slowly, telling stories, and playing with everyone. As she imagined the Pope on the battlefield, Anhua's eyes slightly brightened, her heart filled with respect as she thought, truly extraordinary. As a member of the Orthodoxy, she was especially proud and her mood was slightly disturbed. She did not notice that the eyes of the young array master on the sickbed had opened a small slit, revealing a very gloomy gaze. At this moment, the courtyard outside the window was slightly chaotic. The general had arrived at the sacred hospital, bringing with him a piece of news that was hard to verify. A place called Gaoyang Village might still have cinnabar pills. Why? Because the mysterious person who had refined the cinnabar pill was probably living there. The question that the entire continent wanted to know had suddenly been answered. For a moment, Anhua found it hard to accept. Even after she calmed down, she still found it hard to believe. But the young array master only had 7 days left to live, and the journey from the Mount Song Army headquarters to Gaoyang Village only required 3 days. At the very least, in terms of numbers, there was hope. She looked at the young array master with pity and said, "I want to see it, even if it's fake." Very far south from the Mount Song Army headquarters was Tianliang County, but the scenery in Honshu City was clearly much better. The only regret was that the famous manor outside the city could not be restored to its former glory. The cold-resistant willow trees grew again, and the land was covered in greenery. It looked like a grassland that had been eaten by sheep. 2 years ago, Zhu Luo had been beheaded by Divine General Han Qing beneath the mausoleum of Book. The Zhu clan and the emotion-severing sect had lost the protection of experts of the divine domain and were no longer as powerful as they once were. However, Tianliang County was still a place that the Zhu clan had managed for more than 1,000 years. The imperial court owed them a favor, and coupled with their close relationship with the Prince of Xiang's faction, no one in Tianliang County dared to oppose them, much less challenge the Zhu clan's position in Honshu City. However, Zhu Yi was clearly not in a good mood. As he gazed at the plains on both sides of the river, a hint of loathing and hatred appeared in his eyes. He was the current head of the emotion-severing sect and the head of the Zhu clan. It could be said that he had inherited most of Zhu Luo's inheritance. Everyone knew that he was not Zhu Luo's son, but his nephew, yet he was able to sit so stably on the position of Lord of Honshu City. From this, one could tell that he was definitely very strong or at least very ruthless. I don't like to see thousands of miles of scorched earth, and I don't like to see these rotten plasters either. I have to think of a way to cure them. Zhu Yi raised the wine cup in his hand and gestured to the person across from him. If there's good medicine, I naturally don't mind putting in some effort. The one drinking with him was a general. his body exuding a powerful qi that clearly surpassed the upper level of star condensation. Mount Song's divine general Ning Shiwei had no background and had a wooden temperament. Back then, the divine empress had disliked him, so although he was powerful and skilled in military management, his ranking among the great Zhou's divine generals had never been high and his reputation was not prominent. It was only after the coup of the Mausoleum of Books that he received a decree and returned to the capital. After performing several major feats, he finally obtained the appreciation of the venerable Taoist and the Prince of Xiang. On the banks of the Luo River, when Xiao Zhang severed his arm and broke through, 2 divine generals had wanted to kill him, but they had been stopped by Xiao Zhang's spear. One of them had been him. Perhaps it was precisely because of this that he had to bear the responsibility for his failure and be forced to leave the capital, coming to the Mount Song Army headquarters. The Mount Song Army headquarters was naturally much stronger than his previous army headquarters. He knew that this was the imperial court's reward for him, but he was still not satisfied. If the Tang's second master had not clearly expressed his dissatisfaction with him to the venerable Taoist, he would have remained in the capital in an even more important position, such as replacing Su Shiji. In the 2 years he had spent in the Mount Song Army headquarters, he had thought about many things, so he very quickly understood the meaning behind Zhu Ye's somewhat cryptic words. This pill could regrow bones and cure the dying, so it could naturally be like a spring breeze, turning the scorched myriad willows garden green once more. Zhu Yi naturally would not actually use this medicine to make water or irrigate the ground. This was just a description, a very fitting one. Ning Shiwei wanted this medicine as a stepping stone for his advancement, and the Zhu clan also wanted this medicine to restore the might of the clan, so why not work together? The imperial court has already yielded enough to the Tang clan. Those Wunshui merchants are getting more and more arrogant and willful, somewhat lacking sense of propriety. They truly do need to be taught a lesson. He added, I will send people. If sect master is interested, you can have them go with you. Zhu Yi put down his wine cup and very casually said, I will personally go. Ning Shiwei realized that this matter was even more important than he had imagined. If not for the urgency of the war, he would probably have gone to that small village to take a look. I'll also go and see, a voice rang out from the side. The speaker was a young master, waving his folding fan in the chilly weather, causing his originally handsome face to seem a little cold. Although I don't believe that this medicine is as important as you say, I'm still very curious. The young man was called Tianhai Zhani, the state of Ping's younger brother, the brother-in-law of Prince Chen Lu, and Prince Chen Lu was the Prince of Xiang's son. The relationship between the Tianhai clan and the Zhu clan had always been terrible, like fire and water. Zhu Luo not going to the capital had even become a proverb of the great Zhou dynasty. But just as it was said that time changes and the situation changes, now that the divine empress was dead and Zhu Luo was dead, the wariness and hatred of the past had become insignificant. The hidden fear of the divine empress had allowed them to join hands through the Prince of Xiang. Zhu Yi smiled at Tianhai Zhani, but said nothing. Everyone knew that the authority and resources of the Tianhai clan would ultimately fall into the hands of Tianhai Xingxue or Tianhai Zhani. Compared to Tianhai Xingxue, who had won the admiration of many important ministers of the military, Ning Shiwei deeply disliked Tianhai Zhani. This young man was too gloomy, too cold. Perhaps it was for this reason that he did not refuse. He asked, Your Highness, have you already confirmed that it is not that person? Tianhai Zhani closed his folding fan and lightly tapped it against his palm. With a smirk he said, Could it be that you're afraid? Your Highness said that that person should be in the south. But I'm different from all of you. If this medicine really is related to that person, I truly hope that I can see his figure there. He did not finish his words, but rose and left. As he watched his figure gradually vanish into the setting sun and the withered willows, Zhu Yi said, If you walk too fast, it's easy for something to happen. On the battlefield, young people like him always die very quickly, and I'm no longer young. Ning Shiwei continued, so I don't know anything. I only know that there's a young array master who's not far from death. Now that someone suddenly knows the whereabouts of the cinnabar pill, they'll naturally think of a way to find it. Correct. If he can survive, it's naturally for the best. General truly treats his soldiers like children. Everything is a reward from the lords of the imperial court. On the map, Gaoyang village was a small dot in the mountains of the snowy plains. In the records, Gaoyang village was a military fort that had long since been abandoned. However, when Anhua and the others arrived, they realized that this small dot on the map was actually a large expanse of ancient buildings at the base of the snowy mountains, and the village was still rather lively. The revival of Gaoyang village was entirely due to the war between the humans and the demons. Because of the frequent battles on the northern edge of the snowy plains, the majority of the transportation of armaments from the northeast to Tianliang County now chose to pass through the reopened mountain roads, and the exit of this road that traversed Mount Han just so happened to be in Gaoyang village. Gaoyang village was currently truly very lively, even bustling. The streets were filled with soldiers and peddlers, and one could even see many women in heavy makeup. If a place had a brothel, there would naturally be an inn. The leading officer lifted the young array master on a stretcher into the rear courtyard. Anhua brought 2 female students to the second floor of the inn, intending to order some food and also inquire about a few things. But before they could sit down, their gazes were attracted by a father and daughter on the second floor. They were a father and daughter who were selling their music. The father was dressed in the old clothes of a scholar and held a zither in his bosom. His head was lowered, making it impossible to see his face. The daughter was around 12 or 13 years old. Her appearance was elegant and beautiful, but there was a hint of childishness to it. The distance between her eyes was rather wide, giving her a rather simple-minded appearance. Chapter 755. Anhua had noticed this father and daughter pair because she had noticed that there was something strange about them from a few details. The zither master's clothes were very old and there were no signs of frequent washing, but they were abnormally clean. What was even stranger was that there was snow drifting all around Gaoyang village, and the streets were muddy, but there was not a speck of mud on his shoes. They looked brand new. And there was also the beautiful girl. She did not have the timidity or self-pity of a normal singing girl. She just quietly sat in the corner of the room, her head slightly raised and her eyes somewhat wooden. This was because the indifference on her face could also be understood as disdain for everything around her. In short, she gave off a sense of alienation from the world. This was not a normal father and daughter pair, at least not a common father and daughter pair. Anhua had just thought of this when the clear and moving sound of the zither rose from the middle-aged scholar's fingers. It did not stop, flowing like water. What followed was the girl singing. The girl's voice was very pleasant to listen to, but her pronunciation was rather unique. At the end of the sound, the tip of her tongue would curl up as if she was swallowing back a part of the syllable. However, it did not sound unclear, nor did it make one feel bored or bored. On the contrary, it was like a peerless beauty behind a curtain of beads. Anhua had lived in the capital for a long time and had heard many wonderful songs, but she had never heard a song like this. Unexpectedly, she became immersed in it, temporarily forgetting the strange feeling in her heart. After the song ended, the second floor of the inn fell silent for a long time before applause and sighs of praise rang out. The applause and sighs of praise were not particularly enthusiastic, not because the crowd felt that this father and daughter pair had not sung well, but because, like Anhua, they found the song unforgettable and could not bear to interrupt it with applause. The father and daughter did not rise to return the greeting, nor did they express their gratitude. They did not even take the money. They just quietly sat in the corner of the room. The father adjusted the zither while the girl remained expressionless. Anhua ordered a maid to bring the girl over, wanting to ask her a few questions. The girl ignored her and continued to stare out the window, her eyes somewhat unfocused. And Hua was somewhat depressed, but she had a gentle personality and did not take offense. She called over a waiter and asked him a few questions. Only then did she learn that this father and daughter pair had only arrived at Gaoyang village yesterday. The father was a mute and the daughter had some problems as well. It seemed that she had some kind of strange illness, and Hua stood up and walked to the corner of the room. She smiled at the mute zither player, then squatted down in front of the girl and took her hand. She was an instructor of the 13 divisions of Radiant Green, and was highly skilled in both the sacred light technique and the art of healing. With just a simple grasp of his hand, her fingers had already finished taking his pulse. Feeling the pulse from her fingertips, she frowned slightly. She found that there was indeed a problem with the little girl's body, and it was very complicated. It was very likely that the little girl's sense of perception had been greatly damaged. She looked up at the little girl. The little girl was still looking out of the window, and Hua's gaze fell on the girl's profile. Apart from the fact that the space between the young lady's eyes was a bit wide, there was no other problem to be found. She was very good-looking, and could even be said to be very beautiful. Such a beautiful little person, but a little silly, what a pity! And Hua felt a great deal of pity for this girl. She took a pouch from her sleeve and prepared to slip it to her. There were some pieces of silver in the pouch. At this moment, the girl withdrew her gaze from the window and looked at Hua. Several breaths of time had passed since Hua had taken her hand. The girl's reaction truly did seem rather slow. But Hua would no longer think this way, or perhaps she would not dare to think this way, because she saw the girl's eyes. At such a close distance, she finally understood. The girl's eyes were not dull, only calm. Her aura was not one of alienation, but one of pride that was deeply rooted in her bones. Other than the drifting snow, there was no other person or thing in the world that could disturb the lake of her heart and disturb her calm. Upon seeing the girl's eyes, Hua suddenly felt like all the snow outside the window had surged in, piercing through her clothes and flesh to land on her sea of consciousness. It was like a blade of grass seeing an endless snowstorm, like an ant seeing a giant. Her body became incomparably cold and stiff. She could not even move a finger. She even felt like her sea of consciousness would be frozen into ice in the next moment, and then she would silently die. At this moment, the girl saw the pouch in Hua's hand. The girl very slowly nodded, her movements so subtle that if one did not look carefully, it would be impossible to notice. Then, she turned her head to look out the window once more. The furious snowstorm stopped, the giant's indifferent gaze vanished, and Hua finally felt that smear of warmth in the real world. Her body was no longer stiff and she could move. Not daring to linger any longer, she led her maid down the stairs. When she reached the bottom floor, she realized that her clothes were completely drenched in sweat. Hua did not tell this matter to anyone, not even the general leading the group or the steward of the sacred hospital surnamed Yang. This was because she had an intense understanding that she had almost died from discovering a certain secret. Now that she had survived, she should continue to keep this matter a secret. This was the girl's silent request of her. Because of her fear, when she returned to the rear courtyard and heard the general say that it would be best to immediately depart, she had no objections, only asked a few questions. "Have you confirmed the exact location?" "The army headquarters has already sent people to investigate the whereabouts of the herbs for 2 days. There should be no mistake. There was a medicine shop in Gaoyang village. According to the reports of the scouts, many herbs would be transported to this medicine shop, and then in the middle of the night, they would be transported out of the city, their whereabouts unknown. It was obvious that the owner of the cinnabar pill had chosen Gaoyang village, because it was convenient to travel here, and they could obtain any medicine they wanted. On the afternoon of the same day, the general, Hua, Sir Yang, and several dozen soldiers set out with their maids and the young array master on a stretcher in search of a doctor. After leaving Gaoyang village, They deviated from the official and military roads and set out into the depths of Mount Han. The snow on the road gradually deepened, and it was no longer muddy, but it was similarly difficult to travel. The deeper they went into the mountains, the more quiet and beautiful it was. Amidst the pines, one could faintly see the steam of a hot spring. If not for the war, this place would have long since become a famous scenic spot. The warmth of dusk completely vanished and night descended. Under the cover of the starlight, the group arduously advanced. At some point, they finally reached their destination. There was a small courtyard deep in Mount Han. The courtyard was surrounded by running water, steam rising from it, most likely drawn from the hot spring. Because of the heat of the earth, even though it was winter, the area around the small courtyard was still exuberant. Based on the distance from the hot spring, the 4 seasons naturally formed. There was a lush bamboo forest by the wall of the courtyard, flowers in full bloom in front of the courtyard, and trees shedding their leaves in front of the half-arched window. Of course, the vast majority of places were still cold and frozen, like that small lake, which was covered in snow. There was a pavilion on the lake, surrounded by curtains. 2 figures could be faintly seen within. A gust of wind lifted up a corner of the curtain. There was a fire in the pavilion and several plum blossoms. A man and a little girl sat across from each other by the fire. The girl had a childish face and was dressed in black, her entire body exuding a cold aura. The man was not very old and his eyes were clean. Neither snow nor plum blossoms could compare. Last year's New Year's Eve was also updated, just for fun and to avoid the awkwardness brought on by television. Last year's New Year's Eve chapter was very awesome. It was Chen Chongqing shouting in the spring light of Xuanyang City that Su Li is here. This year's chapter is also very interesting. It writes about 2 of the most terrifying girls in Choosing Heaven, and the male lead has finally appeared once more. I don't want to use playing house and drinking wine to describe the chapter's title, because this chapter doesn't mention it, but it's actually a very good title. Also, I very seriously wish everyone a happy new year and the health of your entire family. P.S. This chapter's title is actually not particularly suitable. It's just that it's been 10 years since I've written that chapter and I miss it a little. I really will write that again, not a continuation, but a rewrite. Chapter 756. In a cold and snowy night, in a pavilion, on a green plum stove, sitting across from each other and drinking tea, it was a scene that exuded elegance and extraordinariness. In the past few days, Anhua had imagined many things about that otherworldly master who had saved countless lives. Now that she saw the scene on the lake, she felt that this was exactly how it should be. At this moment, the young man in the pavilion raised the cup of wine in his hand and took a small sip. The breeze lifted the curtains and also carried the taste of the cup. Everyone was surprised, as they could tell that this was not tea, but wine. Drinking wine on a snowy night is also an elegant affair, Anhua thought to herself. She respectfully bowed to the pavilion, but when she raised her head and prepared to speak, she realized that the young man had disappeared. The black-clothed girl had also left the table and come to the railing. Her gaze was fixed on the shore of the lake. It seemed like she was looking at Anhua's party, but it also seemed like she was looking at an even more distant place. In the faint light of the snowy night and the mist of the lake, the girl's face became a little clearer, yet even more indistinct. She still had a childish air, but she was cold and dazzling, dreamlike and illusory, like a mountain spirit. In such a desolate mountain, on a cold snowy night, encountering such a beautiful garden, and such a cold and aloof young girl, anyone would easily associate it with certain legends. Even Anhua, who had grown up in the 13 divisions of Radiant Green and had a clear Tao heart, couldn't help but be dazed for a moment, even feel an inexplicable fear. But she would not leave, because the young array master was still lying on the stretcher, ready to die at any moment. The others would also not leave, because they had not obtained what they wanted to obtain. "Let's go over first," the general said with a frown. This journey to seek medical advice would naturally not go too smoothly, because it was obvious that the master of the cinnabar pill did not want her true identity to be discovered. The squad from the Mount Song Army headquarters stepped onto the wooden bridge over the lake, their somewhat disorderly footsteps shattering the silence. The black-clothed girl seemed unaware. She looked at a certain place in the night sky, her beautiful and cold face devoid of emotion. Using the dim starlight and lantern light, Anhua noticed that there were many tiny bubbles roiling in the lake under the bridge. When they burst, they condensed into a mist that covered the surface of the lake. The mist was filled with moisture and warmth. It was obvious that this lake was formed from the condensation of hot springs, and there was even a crack in the ground at the bottom of the lake. When everyone entered the pavilion, the black-clothed girl still did not turn around. She was still looking out the railing, as if these uninvited guests did not disturb her mood of drinking on a snowy night. Or perhaps these people did not exist in her eyes at all, even though they had already arrived in front of her. Anhua was about to bow again when she suddenly smelled something and subconsciously turned to the clay stove. Her body trembled and an expression of disbelief appeared on her face. The clay stove was very delicate, no more than a foot long. It didn't seem out of place when placed on the table. A clay bowl was placed on top of the stove, and the bubbling sound of the bowl was similar to the lake water outside the pavilion. The wine was in a small pot carved with plum blossoms, steeped in the cold wind and snow, so this was not warming the wine, nor was it brewing tea, but stewing meat. A pot of braised lamb was being stewed on the clay stove. Compared to the scene of stewing tea on a snowy night, this was admittedly lacking in elegance, but it was not enough to shock Anhua so much. The reason she was shocked, the reason she couldn't help but reveal a pained expression on her face, was because she could clearly smell that this pot of braised lamb contained the scent of many medicinal ingredients. Angelica, wolfberry, clove, immortal grass, epimedium, she could smell a few medicinal ingredients in this pot of lamb, and these were all smells that she had once smelled from a certain pill. The new medical officer of the sacred hospital, Sir Yang, also had an extremely nasty complexion. This was because his true identity was Sir Yang, a guardian of the Tang clan's medicine store in Wenshui City. He had once personally dissected that pill. He was extremely confident that the 34 medicinal ingredients mixed into the pot of lamb stewing on the stove were the ingredients needed to make the cinnabar pill. He once more turned to the black-clothed girl by the railing and narrowed his eyes, sharp as blades, carrying a bone-chilling hostility and rage. It was as if those words had been squeezed through his teeth. Truly extravagant and extravagant. To be able to have such a beautiful garden and pavilion in such a remote mountain in the middle of winter, the owner was naturally no ordinary clan, no ordinary wealthy clan. But none of this was as shocking as this pot of braised lamb. "What's wrong?" The general noticed the strange expressions on the faces of the two and sternly asked. Before Anhua had time to do anything, Sir Yang rushed to the table and used his chopsticks to flip over the leftover braised lamb in the pot. He then poured a cup of wine and brought it to his nose to take a sniff. With just a sniff, Sir Yang's face turned red, the same color as the lamb in the pot. He was not drunk, but angry. He was so angry that his body began to tremble and the wine in his cup spilled out, just like the angry question that followed. What a reckless waste of a heavenly treasure! This is something used to save lives, but you actually used it to stew meat and make wine. The crowd finally understood and couldn't help but be stunned. The general's face became even more gloomy, and some people stared at the lamb and wine pot on the table, their eyes beginning to glow. Anhua had already awoken from her shock, but she still felt a great deal of heartache, but she felt even more disappointment and sorrow. After learning of the cinnabar pill, she had made far too many conjectures about that mysterious medical expert. She had always felt that he was an otherworldly expert who disregarded fame and profit, but an incomparably precious medicine that could allow soldiers on the front lines to escape death and pain, was it really so insignificant to that person? The cinnabar pill was not a miracle that he had painstakingly created to save the common people, but a game that he was playing in this world? He was just like a child, playing house, but the people watching from the side were actually taking it seriously. Then wasn't the value that the common people placed on the cinnabar pill and the adoration that people like her held for him particularly laughable in his eyes? Fine, even if this was just a game, it was still a matter of life and death to ordinary people like her who lived in the mortal world. And Hua inwardly sighed helplessly, concealing her sorrow. She asked the black-clothed girl, "May I ask if you are the master of the cinnabar pill?" The black-clothed girl turned around, but she did not answer her question. Instead, she looked at Master Yang. When Master Yang realized that the bowl of lamb and the pot of wine were both highly likely to contain the cinnabar pill, his emotions had been completely consumed by anger and absurdity, so he did not notice her gaze. No one could see the black-clothed girl's emotions. Her young and elegant face was forever devoid of emotion, like an ancient block of ice. Her voice was similarly cold, but the meaning expressed was completely different from ice. It was brimming with passion, even a little berserk, and of course it was still incredibly absurd. Your filthy hands actually dared to touch my sacred and inviolable wine and meat. This is truly a matter worthy of praise. Everyone, including Hua, was stunned, not understanding what she meant. Master Yang finally came to his senses and looked over in shock. The black-clothed girl's eyes were extremely bright as she said, "It's been a very long time since I've eaten human meat. Thank you for giving me such a perfect reason. Greetings to everyone for the new year. This is the first chapter of the new year. It mainly talks about eating meat. Tomorrow, I'll talk about how to get rid of the grease and protect the stomach, ha 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 ha." Chapter 757. Other than the demons, no one would eat human flesh. Even if there was such a freak, they would only do it in private. They would never dare to announce it to the public, much less have such a proud expression on their faces. The black-clothed girl's words were very absurd and sounded like a joke. Logically speaking, it could only be a joke, but the people in the pavilion could not find it in themselves to laugh. This was because this place was deep in the mountains, far away from the mortal world, on a lake on a cold winter night. This was a place where strange stories were most likely to occur, and she had a very serious expression. An atmosphere of fear and unease enveloped the pavilion, occupying everyone's minds. Shame could easily make a person angry, but fear could as well, because both forced one to confront one's mental weakness. That Sir Yang had originally wanted to say a few words of explanation, but when he spoke, his words turned into angry rebuke from shame. "Am I wrong? These medicines can save lives, but they're being used by you to satisfy your appetites. What you eat is human flesh. What you drink is human blood. What you say is naturally correct." The black-clothed girl's childish face became cold. "Because I have always eaten human flesh and drank human blood." As she spoke, a howl of pain rose from the pavilion. Sir Yang's hand had been severed at the wrist. With a cry of panic and a string of crystalline beads of blood flying into the night sky, the severed hand was controlled by an invisible energy and floated to the black-clothed girl. She looked at the severed hand and slightly arched her brow. She did not move for the moment, her thoughts inscrutable. The crowd stared in horror at this bloody sight, thinking, will she really eat that severed hand? And Hua noticed that the black-clothed girl had an abnormally serious expression, cautious and focused, even seeming to have a divine aura. This discovery filled her with boundless fear and made her body abnormally cold, because it made her think of the girl she had seen in the tavern at Gaoyang village. "Stop messing around," a voice came from the shore of the lake. The young man who had suddenly vanished walked back from the bridge. The appearance of this person caused the oppressive, tense, and fearful atmosphere in the pavilion to inexplicably relax. Perhaps it was because of his gentle tone, or perhaps it was because his clean and delicate face gave off a harmless feeling. The black-clothed girl angrily said, "How was I messing around? That's the braised mutton you made for me. How am I supposed to eat it after that guy's dirty hands touched it?" The young man came out of the pavilion, looked at her and said, "Are you going to bite his hand just because of this?" The girl in black said angrily, "I don't care. I want to eat human flesh. I eat human flesh anyway, so why can't I?" The young man said helplessly, "You tried it 2 years ago. You don't like it. Why are you still thinking about it?" The girl in black snorted and said, "If I can't eat human flesh, would I still be me? Be good. You just said that this hand is very dirty. Quickly throw it away." The young man said to her. There was a hint of pampering in his voice, but more of helplessness, care, responsibility, and obligation. It was like a senior talking to a junior, but strangely, there was a hint of fear. This conversation was also very strange. When had eating human flesh ever been brought up to the table to be discussed? Of course, everyone thought it was ridiculous, but apart from Mr. Yang, who was about to faint from the pain, everyone hoped that this young man could convince the girl in black. No one wanted to have nightmares every night for the rest of their lives. The black-clothed girl was clearly very unhappy, but in the end, she still obeyed and threw the severed hand into the lake. The crowd finally sighed in relief at this sight. "I know what you want, but I really can't give it to you." In addition, the young man's gaze fell on Anhua's face as he said, "The lamb bowl and wine pot truly do have medicinal ingredients, but they are not what you want." Anhua had already confirmed that he was the master of the cinnabar pill and was confused as to why he would speak to her out of all these people. The young man continued, "I'm not that extravagant of a person. If this meat and wine can save people, I naturally won't use them to satisfy my own appetite." And Hua felt even more confused. This person was assuredly no ordinary person, and there was no need for him to explain anything to an ordinary teacher of the 13 divisions of Radiant Green. But when she saw the painfully groaning Mr. Yang, her confusion was replaced by sorrow. But in the end, you are still powerful figures who disregard the lives and deaths of ordinary people. The young man gazed at her serious and stubborn expression and became slightly dazed. He was probably thinking of a girl who had once cultivated in the 13 divisions of Radiant Green. Perhaps it was for this reason that he wanted to give an explanation. "You are a pure healer. You are a true soldier." He looked at Anhua and the general and said, "But this person is different. He is not an ordinary doctor. I can see his greed, so a broken hand is the price he needs to pay." Just like his previous explanation, there was no evidence and it was based on his own judgment, making it very difficult to believe. But when they saw the young man's clear and clean eyes, Anhua and the general believed him. The young man regretfully said, "I didn't think that I would be found so quickly." The mood in the pavilion once more grew tense. Everyone gripped their sabers and crossbows, their breathing a little hurried as they wondered, "Is this person planning to silence us?" If they had not seen the black-clothed girl silently cut off Mr. Yang's wrist, they might have laughed at this idea as wishful thinking, but no one dared to think this. Yet the young man did nothing. He only called the black-clothed girl out of the pavilion and then turned to walk back to the bridge. Only now did everyone notice that he had been carrying a bag this entire time. It turned out that he had been making preparations for his departure when he had vanished. And Hua was still a woman, so her thoughts were more meticulous and her thoughts were more complex. If they had packed their bags in such a short time, did this mean that they were preparing to leave at any moment? What was he hiding from? Was it the world-renowned reputation, extraordinary riches, and endless danger brought by the cinnabar pill? Or was it the world itself? Just who was this young man? What sort of story did he have? The general had come with military orders, so he was naturally unwilling to let the other party leave. With a shout, he charged out of the pavilion. With a boom, dust flew up from the pavilion. He was blocked by an invisible barrier and jolted to the ground. The crowd finally realized that the other party had laid down a seal in the pavilion before leaving. Perhaps there was no danger, but it made it impossible for them to stop their departure. And Hua walked to the edge of the pavilion and shouted at the backs of the two, "We just want to ask for a cinnabar pill to save our lives." The young man did not turn around. "I really don't have any more. The next batch will be in a few days. Go back and wait." And Hua somewhat despondently shouted, "But he can't wait any longer. There are many things that we cannot decide for ourselves. We can only resign ourselves to fate." The young man continued to lead the black-clothed girl to the end of the wooden bridge, talking along the way. "In the future, don't make trouble out of nothing." "When was I making trouble out of nothing? Then can you not be so tyrannical? Killing and eating people at the slightest provocation is really not good. Those people came to steal something. They might even want to attack you, so I naturally had to kill them. If I could kill them, what's the big deal about eating them while I'm at it? I know that you also don't want to eat them, so why force yourself? When did I ever say that I didn't want to eat human flesh? Wasn't it just because you had a point? That hand was too dirty, and it was too troublesome to wash it and pluck the hair. I was just giving you a way out so that it would be easier for you to come down." "Hey, if you say that, aren't you putting me on a ladder again? And besides, please understand that I was giving you face." As they listened to this conversation and watched the gradually fading figures, the people in the pavilion all felt very complex emotions. Just when they thought that everything that had happened tonight would become a memory, an unforgettable cold dream that would disappear without a trace in their lives, suddenly, the starlight and snow in the sky suddenly began to madly dance. A massive rock howled down from the sky and smashed against the wooden bridge. The lake water roiled, waves surged, splinters of wood flew, dust and snow obscured the entire sky. The wooden bridge was broken and the lake was thrown into chaos. The young man and the black-clothed girl stood by the broken bridge, their clothes slightly wet. The silence was particularly oppressive. Suddenly, there was the howl of wind. It was the cold wind blowing at the embers. Then there was the sound of metal grinding against metal and the clashing of armor. Countless torches were lit by the lake, gradually illuminating the scene. There were people everywhere. Chapter 758. It turned out that so many people had been hidden around the lake. Since they were hidden, it naturally meant that these people had arrived a long time ago. These people had come from Gaoyang Village, Xuanyang City, the Mount Song Army Headquarters, Hanqiu City, and even the capital. They were all experts, but they were only the attendants of the truly important figures. These important figures had been standing in the darkness between the mountains this entire time. Tianhai Zhani was dressed in a thin robe, the snowflakes drifting away as they fell upon it. Young people always liked to use various methods to display their demeanor and boast about their cultivation, but as the master of the Zhu clan, Zhu Yi did not need to do this. He was dressed in an extremely expensive fur coat, and Divine General Ning Shiwei was still fully armored in this frigid weather, appearing particularly austere. He looked down at the misty courtyard at the bottom of the valley, which seemed like a fairyland, and frowned. "This place is so desolate and so close to the land of demons, but someone actually managed to build such a place. It's not important who owns this place. What's important is who will be able to own that person after tonight." Tianhai Zhani glanced across the pine forest, making no attempt to conceal his derision and contempt. Even the stupidest of people could imagine that the mysterious master who could refine a wondrous treasure like the cinnabar pill was no ordinary person. But they represented the Zhu clan, the Tianhai clan, and the Prince of Xiang, equivalent to half the great Zhou dynasty. What they needed to consider was not how to seize the precious recipe or the even more important person, but how to prevent others from seizing it. Those people were right across from the pine forest. The Tang's 17th master smirked at them and said, "I truly didn't expect that someone would dare to steal the goods of my Wenshui Tangs." It seemed that the Tang clan had already lost control of the situation tonight. Even though he had made preparations, He probably had not expected that the important figures of the imperial court would place such importance on that person and the recipe. Even someone of Zhu Ye's and Ning Shiwei's status had managed to stealthily infiltrate this nameless mountain range. Tian Haizhani looked at the experts of the Tang clan and jeered. If your Tang clan continued to obediently distribute the cinnabar pill like it did in the past, then it truly could be said to be your goods. But now that you yourselves want to seize the treasure, do you still have the face to stop others? Embezzlement, that sounds even worse. The Tang's 17th master's smile faded. I am speaking to you on behalf of the Tang clan. Ever since they had met in the snowy mountains, Zhu Yi had always had a faint smile on his face. When he heard these words, his smile suddenly blossomed. When your second brother poisons your eldest brother to death, and then enters the ancestral hall to kill pitiful little 36, it won't be too late for you to say that you represent the Tang clan on that day. Hearing these seemingly ordinary but actually sharp and contemptuous words, the Tang's 17th master took in a deep breath, his eyes turning cold. This was Tianliang County, and he was neither the first master nor the second master. In fact, his status in the Tang clan was even lower than Tang's. He could only agree to these words, but, right at this moment, Ning Shiwei suddenly turned around and looked at the courtyard in the snowy gorge below. He grunted and said, "You want to leave?" Before his voice faded away, his fist, which carried the taste of cold iron, heavily bombarded the cliff. With a loud sound, a mountain rock was sent flying and fell down. The faint sound of collapsing could be heard from the valley. The lake seemed to ripple as the wooden bridge snapped. Let's go meet the master of this place." Ning Shiwei walked toward the lake, not even glancing at the Tang's 17th master. But the Tang's 17th master knew that this steely fist was actually meant for him to see. This was a warning and also a display of resolve. Tian Haizhani shook his head, his face brimming with derision, and walked past him. Zhu Yi calmly nodded his head in greeting and also left. The former bishop of the Hall of Heroic Martial glanced at the motionless Tang's 17th master, somewhat worried and somewhat confused. As he watched the torches around the distant lake light up and the mist thickening as the lake surged, the Tang's 17th master suddenly creased his brow. The rocks smashed apart the wooden bridge, startled the lake, and stirred up a great mist. The courtyard, which existed in all 4 seasons, was shrouded in mist. The dusky light released by the countless torches was scattered into an extremely dreamy scene, even more immortal than before. Of course, in the eyes of people with different moods, it could also be said to be rather strange. Tian Haizhani stood by the lake, gazing at the 2 indistinct figures on the broken bridge in the mist. Arching his brows, he said, "Sire is naturally an extraordinary person, a solitary cloud and wild crane, a master beyond the world, but how can you truly be above the mundane world? Since you will sooner or later enter the world of mortals, why not travel with us?" He found these words to be extremely elegant and rather satisfied, but the answer from the mist indicated that it had not achieved the effect he had hoped for. The black-clothed girl's voice was just as emotionless as her person, yet it could easily stir the emotions of others. "You're a demi-human? You don't know how to speak human language?" Tian Haizhani was enraged by these words. With a snort, he prepared to do something, but Zhu Yi stopped him with a glance. "It's a little simpler. Regardless of what you think, since you've seen the sun, there's no possibility of returning tonight." Zhu Yi calmly looked at the 2 people in the mist and said, "No one can take the cinnabar pill for themselves, not the Tang clan, not me, not anyone. This is the imperial courts, and we only want the merit of being the first to offer it. As for your reward, not a single cent will be given to you. You might even receive the venerable Taoist's appreciation." The mist was quiet for a very long time. The young man's voice rang out. "This is mine." Zhu Yi gave a gentle smile, like a teacher patiently explaining to a junior. "I said that no one can take it, including everyone in the mist, including you." The young man in the mist asked, What sort of principle is this? Zhu Yi solemnly replied, since it's the supreme treasure of the world, it should belong to the world. The mist fell silent once more. Tian Haizhani sneered, if you have a precious treasure but are not willing to share it with the world, you should hide it even more secretively, or else you will die. Whether it was spoken elegantly, tactfully, or patiently, the principles of powerful figures had always been very clear. The cinnabar pill was the supreme treasure of the world. If one did not have the corresponding strength or authority, they had no right to keep it. If one wanted to keep it, they could only die. The black-clothed girl's voice once more rang out from the mist. This was her reply to Tian Haizhani. Are you really a demi-human? It was still that joke about not knowing how to speak properly. Tian Haizhani was enraged and harshly yelled, hand over the pill formula and I'll spare your life. As he said this, he secretly made a hand gesture behind his back. He had no intention of waiting for an answer. What he wanted was a sudden attack. Zhu Yi and Ning Shiwei both saw this and raised their brows, but they did not stop him. They also wanted to see what would happen. Even if it was just a probe, there would at least be some response. An expert of the Tianhai clan noiselessly swept across the lake, strangely vanishing into the mist. And then, he simply vanished. Nothing happened. Not a single sound rang out. Time slowly passed, but the mist remained quiet, with no response. Everyone felt that this was truly strange. Tianhai Zhani's complexion turned abnormally nasty. Zhu Yi and Ning Shiwei's expressions turned solemn. Suddenly, there was the sound of water. The lotus leaves in the mist moved, and the corpse of the Tianhai clan expert floated out. It was like a boat. Wherever it passed, the lake water would gradually be dyed in a dazzling dark red. Chapter 759. As he gazed at the corpse gently drifting in the lake, Tianhai Zhani's face instantly paled, as white as paper or as white as snow, becoming more and more similar to his more famous older brother. This did not mean that he was afraid, but that he was angry. Again! He harshly yelled as he looked at the indistinct figures in the mist. The sound of something breaking through the air could be heard. This time, without any concealment, several experts of the Tianhai clan leapt over the lakeshore and entered the thick fog. This time there was finally a response, and it quickly arrived. It was a light sound, like a leather bag filled with water being pierced by a sharp arrow. Plap plap plap. Several experts of the Tianhai clan were still in the air when they shattered, transforming into innumerable lumps of flesh that fell to the ground. The lake was instantly dyed even redder and the waves were restless. The mist showed no signs of dissipating, remaining thick. The young man and woman were faintly discernible in the mist, and it was impossible to see what they were doing. Ning Shiwei and Zhu Yi solemnly glanced at each other, seeing the wariness in each other's hearts. They knew that this mysterious master of the cinnabar pill was no ordinary person. It was precisely because they had mentally prepared themselves that they had personally come to this remote mountain range. Yet they had not expected this person to possess such an unfathomable level of cultivation, such strange and incomprehensible techniques, and even more frightening was his callous and unyielding will. They couldn't help but wonder, could it be that the Tang clan had retreated at the last moment because they knew more inside information and had intentionally used them as the vanguard? Just like how they had secretly arranged for the squad in the pavilion. But at this point, they could no longer make any other arrangement. You're seeking death. Tianhai Zhani's entire body trembled in rage as he harshly yelled, "Fire!" Ning Shiwei said nothing, his expression indifferent as he gazed into the mist, the frost on his armor suddenly growing heavier. The sounds of ballistae being drawn taut echoed through the forest by the lake. 100 some of the toughest divine ballistae of the Mount Song army were aimed at that figure in the depths of the mist. Zhu Yi also said nothing. His eyes slightly narrowed, the fur on his fur coat standing up at some point and stabbing into the night sky. He looked like a fierce tiger preparing to leap into a ravine and fight. He and Ning Shiwei were well aware that the 100-some divine crossbows of the Mount Song Army headquarters were not necessarily enough to deal with the young man and woman in the fog. On the contrary, it was highly likely to arouse their true viciousness. If they wanted to kill their way out of the encirclement, they would assuredly attack with all their strength. Thus, whether they could obtain complete victory tonight would depend on the next exchange. He had to end this battle in an instant, so he naturally couldn't hold back. He had to use his full strength. Zhu Yi and Ning Shiwei had calm expressions, but in truth, they were already silently circulating their true essence, raising their qi to its peak state as they prepared to subdue or kill their opponent in a single strike. One was the head of the Zhu clan, the other a divine general of the Great Zhou, both indisputably upper-level star condensation experts. With the two of them acting in such a resolute manner, coupled with the cooperation of over 100 divine crossbows, let alone the fact that the man and woman in the fog were still very young, even experts of the proclamation of liberation at the level of Xiao Zhang or Liang Wangsun would probably have to temporarily avoid their attacks. Just when battle was about to break out, a cool breeze suddenly blew. The extreme north of this mountain range was already very close to the land of demons, and it was also midwinter, so the night winds in the mountains were naturally extremely cold, so cold that they could be described as bone-piercing. However, this garden, lake, and pavilion had hot springs that converged, so even the most frigid of strong winds that blew across the surface of the lake were no longer cold, but rather a refreshing breeze. This breeze ruffled the lotus leaves on the lake, ruffled the clothes on the corpses, and the thick fog that seemed like it would never disperse gradually began to fade. Starlight descended from the night sky, boundlessly illuminated by the white snow covering the mountains and plains, illuminating the surface of the lake with great clarity. This place was very much like a garden in the south. The lake and mountain contrasted with each other, the flowers and trees shading each other, lotuses growing in the water, a pavilion in the lotus, and a wooden bridge to the north and south of the pavilion. At this moment the bridge was broken. The starlight fell on the broken bridge, first falling on a hand. This hand was very small, as white as jade, but at this moment it was covered in blood. The black-clothed girl looked at her hand, her brow tightly furrowed, her mouth slightly open, the tip of her tongue faintly visible. She seemed to be hesitating whether or not she should lick it. At her side, a young man had his head lowered, using a handkerchief to wipe the water off his body. His body had probably been soaked by the splashing of water when the bridge was broken by the mountain rock. He then handed the handkerchief to the black-clothed girl, probably wanting her to wipe the blood off her hand. All was quiet. Whether it was the people trapped in the pavilion or the people on the lakeside, they all watched this scene with complicated emotions and remained silent. Those people in the pavilion now probably understood the role they were playing in this matter, so they remained silent. The soldiers and experts by the lake were silent because they were shocked that the other party really was a young man and woman. Although their faces were handsome, there was nothing special about them. Inexplicably, Ning Shiwei and Zhu Yi also remained silent until they clearly saw the young man's face. In a very short period of time, their expressions changed countless times as if they had seen something inconceivable, and then they squeezed out a few sounds from their mouths. It was a very complex and strange sound, like a sigh, but also more helpless and somewhat pained, more like a groan. Note, then, their bodies suddenly sank down. Not much, only half a foot. Their feet sank into the shore of the lake. Two terrifying and powerful qis exploded outwards. Countless rocks and mud were jolted into the air like arrows. Several soldiers and an expert of the emotion-severing sect that were slightly closer to them were shaken into a bloody pulp. Even the people farther away were injured, their screams echoing through the air. The ballista bolts that were about to be fired vanished in this chaos. Ning Shiwei's armor was covered in dust and his complexion was like iron, extremely unsightly. Zhu Yi coughed incessantly, appearing to be in some pain. Even his back was bent over. Just what was going on? Tianhai Zhani's emotions were similarly in chaos. His cultivation level was not high enough, but he was still a descendant of a noble clan and had received a good education since childhood. He had seen many experts, so he understood what was going on. Just a moment ago, Zhu Yi and Ning Shiwei had raised their qis to their peak, their every movement possessing the power to cleave apart mountains. But just like the great river flowing east, if one wanted to stop at a time like this, one had to pay a corresponding price. In normal times, they were completely capable of slowly dispersing their qis, but for some reason, they had to do it immediately, resulting in a few problems. Although they had forced the vast majority of their qis into the earth, there were still some shock waves rippling out. Just how terrifying were the qis of two upper-level star condensation experts? Even if it was just the shock waves. As a result, the battlefield was in chaos, and they themselves had suffered significant injuries. Tianhai Zhani understood what was going on, but he was even more confused about what was going on. Why had Zhu Yi and Ning Shiwei suddenly dispersed their qis? And why had they been so resolute? It had to be known that they were not ordinary cultivators, but the masters of noble clans, important generals, truly ambitious and ruthless individuals. When their will to fight exploded, even if the one standing across from them was their own son, they would still strike. Yet when they saw the young man's face, they knew that they could not strike. Even if they had to jolt their trusted subordinates to death, even if they had to risk their own injuries, they had to immediately let their opponent know that they would not strike. Immediately. To make a clan master and a divine general of the great Zhou feel such fear, just who was that person standing on the broken bridge? In the next moment, Tianhai Zhani finally realized who that young man was. His face instantly paled, not from anger, but from the boundless bewilderment and fear in his heart. Note: when Ning Shiwei and Zhu Yi saw Chen Chongqing's small face, they could not help but let out that sound. Please refer to the sound that Yang Juhua could not help but make when Zhou Meiyan 20151213 sang her tears in the 5th season of K-Popstar. I've always been a loyal viewer of this Korean drama, and this year I strongly recommended it. At the time, Yang Juhua's moans were especially good. Really, everyone just needs to search for it. Youku and Bilibili have it. Chapter 760. If Tianhai Zhani still could not guess that person's identity, what right did he have to contend with Tianhai Xingxue for the position of clan head? In the Myriad Willows garden, he had even mentioned this possibility, even saying that if it really was that person, he would very much like to meet him. Who could have expected that he would really meet that person tonight? What would he do next? Only then did he realize that any preconceived notions were meaningless, because before the real situation appeared, people tended to have more courage than their real selves. He couldn't do anything now. He didn't even have the courage to look her in the eye. Very few people now compared that person to other experts of the younger generation, not because that person's strength had already far surpassed his peers, but because that person had long since surpassed the category of so-called young geniuses. He was no longer a mortal, but a true saint. As he gazed at that figure on the broken bridge, Tianhai Zhani's body went extremely stiff, wishing that he had not appeared tonight. Zhu Yi was still coughing. The Zhu clan head's injuries seemed to be more severe than anyone had imagined. He coughed painfully, his head lowered, his waist bent, unable to straighten his body. It was like his lungs were about to burst from the coughing. With some difficulty, he raised his right hand and waved. The experts of the emotion-severing sect understood and stepped forward to support him. Then they retreated into the darkness. Upon clearly seeing the face of that person on the bridge, Ning Shiwei's complexion turned nasty. As he watched Zhu Yi retreat, his complexion turned even gloomier. Because he had understood. Zhu Yi had been coughing painfully precisely so that he would not raise his head. As long as he did not raise his head, he would not see that person on the bridge, or perhaps he would not let that person on the bridge see him. In this way, He could pretend that he had not seen anything before, that he had not seen anything now, that he had not recognized that person's identity. Ning Shiwei's reaction was not as fast as Zhu Ye's, so he could not pretend, so what should he do? Tian Haizhani also came to his senses. As he watched Zhu Yi and the others retreat into the darkness with unimaginable speed, he inwardly cursed the old fox. The experts of the emotion-severing sect supported Zhu Yi as they retreated, but there were still many people around the lake. There were no more sounds of crossbows being knocked, blades being unsheathed, metal grinding, somber and heavy breathing. All was silent. The soldiers of the crossbow camp and the experts of the Tianhai clan had already vaguely guessed at what was going on and were extremely nervous and uneasy. Even their breathing seemed to stop. What was supposed to be a short few breaths of time felt like an eternity to them. The armored figure finally bowed towards the center of the lake. Looking at this scene, everyone felt like they had just survived a disaster. If he insisted on not kneeling, no matter what happened tonight, how many of the hundreds of people present would be able to survive? Ning Shiwei of the Mount Song army pays respects to His Holiness the Pope. Ning Shiwei knelt on one knee in the snow by the shore. Tian Haizhani was kneeling nearby, his head lowered, making it impossible to see the expression on his face. The sound of metal rubbing against each other once again broke the silence of the snow lake. It was not the sound of swords being unsheathed, but the sound of armor changing shape. Several hundred people knelt in the snowy forest by the lake, facing the figure on the bridge and saying in unison, paying respects to His Holiness the Pope. Their voices were very uniform, but some were trembling slightly. It was unknown whether they were nervous, excited, or afraid. The young man was obviously not used to it. After a moment of silence, he said, "Get up." "Thank you, Your Holiness." The clattering of armor once more rose up. The young man said, "Disperse." Countless gazes fell on Ning Shiwei and Tian Haizhani. Tian Haizhani's face was pale and his thin lips were tightly pursed. He said nothing, appearing rather sinister and stern, but he finally had the stubbornness of a young man. Ning Shiwei expressionlessly said, "We solemnly obey His Holiness's decree." The clattering of armor and the hurried sound of footsteps rang out. The snow and mud were trampled apart, just like the mood of many people. "Disperse." With these simple words, everyone dispersed. The torches were nowhere to be seen, the starlight once more flourished, and the darkness thickened. In the blink of an eye, the lake returned to its undisturbed state. There was only the young man and woman on the broken bridge, and those people in the pavilion who were unable to leave. The young man was naturally Chen Chongxing, who had vanished for 2 years. The black-clothed girl was the little black dragon. She now had a name, Cinnabar. The lake was quiet and beautiful. Chen Chongxing gazed at the lotus leaves in the lake, silently thinking. It was very normal for someone to use the Cinnabar pill to find clues to his whereabouts. It was also normal for those people to discover that he was the master of the Cinnabar pill, so they hastily retreated without fighting. Probably only that madman, Xiao Zhang, would dare to attack the current pope in front of so many people. But when these two things happened together, it was clearly abnormal. It was obvious that both the people in the pavilion and the people who had just left were characters being used. It seemed like tonight's matter was not over yet. The lake was very quiet, as if nothing had happened at all. No rocks had fallen from the sky, no experts had surrounded the lake, no murder had occurred in the fog, no blood had dyed the lake red, and no rain of crossbows had nearly been unleashed. But the wooden bridge had still been broken, the lake had still been red, and those people had still come, so it was not advisable to stay here for long. He glanced at Cinnabar. Cinnabar rolled her eyes at him. In the end, she was still a black frost dragon. Even a little girl's action of rolling her eyes had a different effect. Her bewitching vertical pupils were especially white, clearly expressing her emotions. But she still complied with his wishes and removed the seal on the pavilion. The general led his people out of the pavilion and prostrated, not daring to speak. and Hua's mind was in extreme agitation, but her movements were still meticulous and pious. But when she thought about her rudeness to the Pope, she couldn't help but feel nervous. As for the one-armed Sir Yang, his face was pale and terrified. He thought to himself, I'm probably doomed. Leave this place as quickly as possible. Something will happen in a little while, and when the time comes, I might not be able to protect all of you. Chen Chongqing did not turn around. He calmly gazed at a certain place in the mountains. There was an endless darkness there, and it seemed to hide endless dangers as well. In a certain place in the mountains, the Tang 17th Master was also gazing at the same darkness. The former bishop of the Hall of Illustrious Persons and his personal subordinates from Wenshui were currently looking at him with eyes brimming with respect. Everyone now naturally knew that the Tang 17th Master had long since known of the identity of the Cinnabar Pills Master. Now that they thought about it, the suppression he had received from Zhu Yi, Tian Haizhani, and the others was naturally just a facade. He truly was worthy of being the master of the Tang clan. His methods were truly steady and ruthless. If this was a scheme to borrow a knife, then tonight, he had unquestionably borrowed the world's fastest knife. Even if Zhu Yi and the others had reacted so quickly, even if Chen Chongqing's personality was still as gentle as it was in the past, if the Li Palace were to learn of this matter, how could the orthodoxy let it go? But why was it that the Tang 17th Master's face showed no pride, only such solemnity? This chapter has been too difficult. The main reason is that there are 3 clues in the grand plot that is about to unfold. I have never been the best at writing about changing scenes, so I had a headache over how to get to the point. In the end, I decided to get straight to the point and kill to my heart's content.